Good morning, everyone. My name is Cal Ayub, and I'm the Director of the Office of Electric Reliability at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. On behalf of the Commission, I would like to welcome you all to FERC's annual Reliability Technical Conference. The purpose of today's conference is to discuss policy issues related to the reliability of the bulk power system. Before turning it over to Chairman Rosner and the Commissioners, I'll briefly review a few logistics. This is a half-day conference scheduled to end around 12:30 p.m. and will be followed immediately by the Wildfire Risk Mitigation Conference at 1:30 p.m. here in the Commission meeting room. Today's agenda includes two panels. We'll begin with a NERC update on the general state of reliability by Jim Robb, President and CEO of NERC. The first panel will focus on leadership perspectives on the state of the bulk power system, and the second panel will discuss ensuring reliability with large loads. We will have a 10-minute break between sessions. This conference is open to the general public and is being webcast and transcribed. Only the commissioners, panelists, and a small number of staff have the ability to speak today. So please note, we will not discuss the specific details of any pending or contested proceedings before the Commission, and we ask that all participants refrain from doing so. If anyone engages in these discussions, our colleagues from the Office of General Counsel will interrupt the discussion to ask the speaker to move on to another topic. Given the packed agenda, panelists will introduce themselves, but will not provide separate statements. And finally, as is evidenced by today's agenda, electric reliability is a complex and multifaceted topic, and it's infeasible to cover all these relevant topics with this agenda. So please submit any comments you have under the docket AD 25-8 via the Commission's e-library system. So with those initial matters out of the way, I'll now turn it over to Chairman Rosner and the other commissioners for their opening remarks. Thank you again for coming. Chairman?
Thank you very much, Cal, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Commission's 2025 Reliability Technical Conference. I really want to thank our panelists for being here. I appreciate that you've traveled far and that you represent a diverse cross-section of expertise that's really going to help the Commission move this issue forward. I also want to thank the Commission staff who worked really hard to put this together. Take a look at the size of this briefing book. But really, I just want to make a few very brief remarks, and then I'll turn to colleagues for theirs, and we'll hear from Jim Robb at NERC. Reliability is I think the most important thing that this Commission does. It's about national security. It's about economic prosperity. It's about public health and safety, keeping people warm, safe, cool in their homes. These days, we've talked around this table quite a bit about how fast things are changing. And one of the ways that I think about reliability is I think about it as change management. Some of those factors that we're grappling with even today are load growth and new large loads. We've got a changing resource mix. We've got weather events that are challenging our grid. We've got supply chain constraints and geopolitical volatility. All these things contribute to the work in front of us, not just today, but in the coming years. And when I think about the work of this Commission, I orient around a few responses that leverage the change, not just as a challenge, but as a way to do more and do things better. When I think about parts of the country that have markets, colleagues and I have been working to make sure that our markets send the right signals to invest in the right kinds of technologies that are available in the days and hours that we need them. We want to make sure that we have the right incentives for resources that perform under stress. And we want to make sure that that we are compensating and sending signals to invest in all resources as appropriate, whether that's dispatchable generation, variable renewables, storage, because fundamentally I see our grid as needing every single megawatt, every single electron, and every single molecule we can get to meet demand on those peak days and peak hours. Also fundamental to this challenge is we have a lot of demand today. And so how do we meet that? Well, we need to meet the moment by accelerating how we build. And that means we need to make sure that we're studying faster, we're giving permits faster, and unlocking all different types of energy infrastructure that are needed. And we've all talked extensively about some of the things this commission's been doing to accelerate that. I look forward to hearing from you with the ears to the ground on what you're doing. And then bringing us back to the purpose of this conference, one of the great things about this is that we have this coordination and collaboration across the government and the private sector, between the state and federal governments, between the natural gas and electric industries. And when I think about our markets, it's both, it's doing the planning right and also getting the real-time operations right. So with that spirit of collaboration, I'm really excited to welcome you here today and to keep moving forward together on this critically important work. I'll turn to my colleagues. Commissioner C.
Well, good morning, everyone. I will echo the welcome and the thank you for taking the time to be here today and for the significant time to prepare comments ahead of time. We're really looking forward to your expertise, both the members of this panel and the panel to come. Thank you so much, Cal, to you and your team and other members of the commission staff for the hard work that's gone into today. I have very little to add because I'm very eager to hear what our experts have to share with us, but it goes without saying that reliability is such an important and perennial concern for us. And over the past months, we've been having many of the same conversations, and the urgency is becoming more and more pressing, whether we're talking about rapid retirements and too slow replacements of generation. I think there are so many causes for that, but I think we can all agree that that pace of replacement is too slow. And then how do we respond to the changing characteristics of the grid when it comes to the changing composition with those replacements? And then, of course, adding the challenges of demand and large load growth on top of that in terms of just the pace of growth, the unknowns of the characteristics of this load, and how do we deal at the speed we need to have the flexibility as we're in a time of quick change, but making sure that we are being responsible from a reliability perspective. And of course, those are not the only concerns we have, and I know we'll hear many more of them, whether it comes from extreme weather events, the good work that's been doing, what more there is to do there, wildfires. I'm very glad that we have another conference later this afternoon specifically focused on that area. So many challenges, increasing gas-electric coordination as we're understanding how deeply interconnected the systems are. So how do we do that all reliably, literally keeping the lights on, and at a cost that is fair and tolerable for the real people who pay their bills? This is a very important and very difficult topic. It requires so many different perspectives, and I'm particularly grateful for the expertise we have from state and federal regulators, from those across the utility and industry space. I think we really need to be talking with each other, sharing good ideas from all of those different aspects of the space, and I really look forward to that as well. So again, I will end where I started, of thanking you for your time and being part of this important conversation, and more importantly, being on the front lines of this critical work.
Thank you. Commissioner Chang.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to just echo thanks for everyone who are participating on this, but also all our staff in preparing, particularly the pre-filed comments. It's incredible how much work you've already put in to prepare for this panel, so I'm very, very grateful. Reliability of the energy system comes in many flavors. And I want to set the stage up front. There's resource adequacy. We've been talking about it for many, many months, having sufficient supply in all hours of the year to meet the instantaneous demand level. And then two, there's transmission adequacy to ensure that our wires network are sufficient to bring the supply resource to load at reasonable and affordable prices. And then three, system reliability to ensure that the physical systems can sustain and defend itself from extreme weather events and other extreme events. And then four, system security, importantly, including physical and cyber security, so that the overall system is protected from unexpected hits from the external sources. Because these are complex issues, I'm really, really grateful for the work that not only our staff have been working on, but NERC. I'm very impressed with the volume and the pace that we're really, your team has been working on all of these issues, Jim, and I'm really extremely grateful. We host this reliability technical conference every year. However, this year, I think more than ever before, the potential imbalance between the supply and demand and the lack of clear situational awareness in either the near term of the operational time frame or the longer term of like how much load and how much generation we must plan and how much transmission we must build over the 5, 10, 20-year horizon is incredible. And I think these uncertainties and sort of risks associated with these are sort of coming to a head. And what I'm particularly interested in is what aspect of this can we take actionable steps, especially here at the Commission. Now, while the known and projected impacts of load growth, particularly the large drivers of change, are the largest drivers of change, particularly these large data centers, their effects are complicating, though. They're complicated, and they're complicating the pre-existing conditions that we already talked about and other commissioners have talked about here. And we also I recognize that the systems are very much codependent. So it's not just between the gas and electric system, but now we're actually engaging with customers probably more than we've ever before, particularly from the FERC perspective. So FERC, of course, plays an important role in the development and operations of our electric and natural gas system. But we're typically, we're usually limited in our roles. So I want to make sure we take specific steps, though, from this conference to really meet the load growth, and as well as taking the short-term sort of steps we need, but also the plan for the longer term. So I'm really interested in your recommendations and steps that we need to take to really actionable steps that we can take. And specifically, I'm very interested in if there are analytical gaps that we are jointly as an industry that we're not meeting. What are those analytical gaps, and then what do we need to ensure that the industry is sort of working together to meet those gaps going forward? We engage with states, and we engage with consumer advocates, we engage with generators and ISOs, and I hope that in the future we may actually engage more with the large loads that we haven't done traditionally. So this will be interesting sort of change, as you say, change management, like how do we take our current role and how do we move forward in an actionable way. So thank you very much for being here. Back to you.
All right, thank you. Cal, move us on.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners. I will now begin the first panel with Jim Robb, who will go over the findings, conclusions, and recommendations from NERC's annual State of Reliability Report. Jim.
Great. Thank you, Cal. Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. It's always an honor to be here to help set the table for this discussion. The thickness of those binders does intimidate me, just so you know. I'd also like to extend our congratulations to Commissioners Sweat and Lacerte on their confirmations. I look forward to working with all of you in the coming months and years. So I don't really want to regurgitate what's in our written statement, nor what you've heard me say so many times in the past. But in many technical ways, the reliability of the power grid remains extremely high, but paradoxically, the risks to reliability continue to mount. In fact, we're seeing an increasing number of small-scale events and near misses that continue to reinforce what we can't call anything but a 5-alarm fire when it comes to reliability. And we're facing those for issues you've all noted. Dwindling resource adequacy with atrophying reliability services, continuing extreme weather patterns, critical interdependency with natural gas and other sectors, especially telecom, and these often manifest themselves under extreme conditions. Challenging policies impacting resource and fuel development, load development, and the ability to site and permit needed infrastructure, and also just an escalating toxic soup of security risks, both physical and cyber. This past spring, the Iberian Peninsula experienced a widespread cascading blackout, reportedly due to insufficient reactive power management, which resulted in loss of control for both voltage and frequency, with no way for the operator to rebalance them. As we continue to add inverter-based resources to the grid, we need to stay ahead of these unfamiliar dynamics that result. And these are the issues that keep us up at night, ensuring that we're using every tool in our toolbox to protect the grid's reliability, while still enabling the extraordinary growth that's projected in the coming years to materialize reliably. We use our reliability standards, reliability guidelines, NERC alerts, and EISAC information sharing tools, such as the Critical Broadcast Program and the All Points Bulletins, to communicate actions to industry that they need to take to keep the grid reliable, resilient, and secure in an ever-escalating risk and threat environment. The Commission has been a great partner in supporting these programs. We have strong and very productive alignment with the Office of Electric Reliability, and the continent and its 400 million citizens owes you its gratitude. NERC, working with our 6 regional entities, collectively called the ERO Enterprise, affectionately called the ERO Enterprise, I might add, is helping to enable our energy future, helping to assure that the nation can reliably meet the growing need for electricity that's critical to economic prosperity and our national security. So I want to spend my remaining time focused on our collective priorities for the coming months, and I see we already have the slide up. The first is modernizing our oversight processes. Our marquee effort here is an overhaul of our standards development process, led by a cross-sector representative group of stakeholders to substantially reimagine our existing process, which is struggling to keep pace with the rate of risk development. The only sacred cow in our charge to this task force is to maintain and where possible, even enhance industry participation and validation of the mandatory requirements ultimately proposed. We're also rethinking elements of our organizational registry to ensure that we have the right entities registered given their ability to impact grid reliability. With the Commission's approval, we are expanding the number of IBRs in the registry to recognize their common mode failure risks and are considering the proper approach to data centers and large loads. Finally, we're implementing the compliance monitoring and enforcement program flexibility that the Commission granted to us in your order in December 2024, which allows us to propose abeyance periods for certain novel and challenging requirements in our standards and to significantly streamline how we process low-risk violations. The second is how we can enable the reliable interconnection of large loads. And I know that the second panel will focus specifically on this issue. But we absolutely understand that data center growth is a key national security priority. And we're doing our part to ensure that these loads can reliably connect at the speed and scale that they desire. These loads have the potential, though, to impact both elements of reliability. The energy adequacy issue is well known. Less well understood is their operational performance and how they impact grid reliability. We're aware of the challenges associated with ensuring sufficient resources are available to meet the energy demands for existing and new customers and the very challenging cost allocation issues occupying many economic regulators. As you would expect, our focus is on load behavior and ensuring that they support reliable system operations. Our large load task force is tasked with understanding the scope of the risk to the reliable operation of the grid, identifying potential impacts, and developing agreed upon mitigations. And given the scale of proposed data centers and data center campuses, some of the scale of 1 to 5 nuclear units, it's important that they can be modeled and operated in a manner that's consistent with such unprecedented scale. Through our event analysis program and dissection of last summer's unexpected load losses in Virginia, we're developing a better understanding of large load interconnection requirements and have highlighted those in our recommendations to industry through our recent Level 2 alert. We anticipate codifying those in a reliability guideline later this year or early next year, and maybe eventually even in auditable standards. However, our goal remains clear, right? To enable more of these data centers to be added without compromising, and to the extent they can, even enhancing the reliability of the bulk power system. Third area of focus is modernizing our reliability assessments. This year, we've taken the first step towards creating a continentally consistent wide area energy assessment to provide a better understanding of the energy adequacy risks across North America. Ultimately, we aspire to link our recent work on design basis, capacity accreditation, and interregional transmission into a more comprehensive view of reliability in our long-term reliability assessments. Once built, we will also be able to conduct periodic assessments of key reliability indicators such as small signal stability, the adequacy of interconnection-wide reliability services such as frequency, voltage, and ramping, and other reliability analyses as needed on a consistent basis across the continent. Fourth area of focus is completing a set of what I can't call anything but a set of heavy lift reliability standards. In addition to completing the known set of priority standards, such as inverter-based resources, internal network security monitoring, supply chain risk management, and energy adequacy, we know there's more on the horizon as we continue to understand unfolding risks. And this is one of the reasons why modernizing our approach to developing these standards is so critical. The fifth area is advancing electric and gas coordination. As the older coal fleet retires, we've exposed the vulnerabilities associated with the natural gas system's ability to support electric generation, especially during extreme cold events. However, the issues between these two sectors aren't limited to extreme cold. The increasing flexibility demands of the power sector are beginning to outstrip the ability of gas storage, whether embedded in pipeline pack and draft or underground storage, to balance power sector volatility. We are encouraged by industry leadership initiatives by the gas trades with the formation of the Natural Gas Readiness Forums and the role of NERC in driving solutions through the GEAR Task Force. Managing the bridge between these two sectors is already critical, and it's only going to increase in importance as the administration seeks to expand natural gas production and use in the power sector. And the sixth area is expanding cyber and physical security preparedness. I've described this as a toxic soup, and I can't think of a better descriptor for the environment that we're in. The success of Chinese threat actors, known as typhoons, and there are several flavors of them, as you all know, in penetrating the telecommunications sector in the United States demonstrates very clearly the bad guys are bad. They're not dumb. Russia, Iran, and North Korea also bring nation-state capabilities against individual companies, and as we all know, that's just not a fair fight. We've seen a rise in sabotage attempts by domestic violent extremists across the country targeting electric infrastructure. And like every sector, we have to worry about everyday bad actors, the punks, thugs, and crooks, as well as organized ransomware gangs. The EISAC continually works with industry on mitigating the complex, constantly evolving threats to the grid, involving a spectrum of both geopolitical conflicts as well as rising tension between China and Taiwan. Our 8th GridX, scheduled for next month, is designed to really push the response capability of the sector to failure so that we can expose all the soft underbellies across the industry and get those shored up before 2027. So I'll wrap up here. I hope this all gives you a sense of our priorities and the seriousness with which we take our mission to protect the grid of today while ensuring it's able to power tomorrow. Reliable and affordable electricity is the foundation of achieving our nation's economic and national security needs. NERC and the regional entities are laser focused on our critical role to help achieve these priorities. So thank you all again for the opportunity, and I look forward to dissecting that binder in front of all of you. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jim, for that excellent presentation, and ended on a happy note. But we'll now move on to the remaining panelists. To facilitate dialogue, as a reminder, please, panelists will not be given opening statements. Those can be filed in the docket. Just please briefly introduce yourself so we can have time for the Q&As. And we will start with, I think, Mr. Chairman, it's the coolest name I've seen in the room, Mr. Carlos Casablanca. I had to ask him if that was real.
Thank you very much, Cal.
We'll start with you and move down the table, please.
Carlos Casablanca, Managing Director for Transmission and Distribution Planning for the AEP Southwest Power Pool region. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Kojo Gartitego. I am Executive Vice President and CEO of Duke Energy Carolinas in the natural gas business.
Good morning. My name is Gil Quiniones. I'm the President and CEO of Commonwealth Edison. We're one of the operating utilities of Exelon.
I am Matt Holtz, Vice President of Transmission Operations at Invenergy. I'm grateful for the invitation. Thank you.
Good morning. Tricia Pridemore with the Georgia Public Service Commission, also president at the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners for 3 more glorious weeks.
Good morning. Arnie Quinn, Senior Vice President of Regulatory Policy for Vistra. We're a large independent power producer and competitive supplier. Thank you.
Thank you for your introductions. Chairman Rosner will now kick off the Q&As. Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, for the presentation. Well, I wanted to start to talk about permitting and building quickly. Commissioner Pridemore, I wanted to start with you. First of all, thank you for your service to NERC. It's been a real pleasure working with you and your colleagues this past year. Now that we're in that last 3 weeks, I'm pretty sure you're going to tell us what you really think, which is great. But yeah, I was just struck by reading through your testimony, where your work in Georgia highlights that you're doing all that you can to reliably meet all the load growth you're seeing. Nuclear, gas, storage, solar, advanced reconductoring, hydropower. I'm probably missing some things, but there was like this long list of things that you're doing quickly, that Georgia's made big investments in. What are some of your lessons learned about doing that? And also, I love the way you talk about affordability in light of all this, and how you're lowering prices in some cases. How does it all work?
Thank you, Chairman Rosner. Thank you for this opportunity to be here today, as well as you, Commissioner C. and Commissioner Chang. I always appreciate this. So my last year as NERC president, we focused on these issues. And we focused on them not just in our conferences, but in our conversations. Not a day goes by that I don't speak with any fewer than 5 state commissioners from across the country who are grappling with these very issues. Their market structures might be different. The economic development demands and needs of their systems might be different, but everyone's going through the same thing at the same time. In Georgia, we saw this load growth coming. We saw this load growth coming as data centers started to approach us back in 2019 and 2020. Back in 2023, we had 63 data centers in the state of Georgia, representing about $1.8 billion in GDP. We expect that to quadruple over the next 7 years. We're seeing a tremendous amount of load growth, not just from data centers or AI data centers in particular, but also in the onshoring of manufacturing and new load that's coming into the state. So at the heart of it, one of the things that I've been able, I think, to share with my colleagues across the country is the importance of the premium that we place on planning. So not just planning and writing reports, shoving in a desk drawer, but an actionable plan that you can give to the utilities and the utilities can operationally build against. It also provides the state commissioners and the citizenry viewership into what's happening with the utilities in the state. And it also gives us a framework for us to do rate making off of. We've had to make that nimble as we've seen the needs of the Georgia system grow. Instead of an every 3-year mandatory planning cycle, what we've done recently is have interim IRPs, which have allowed us to update that. That's a 20-year on generation, a 10-year on T&D, and then we also started back in 2019 one that's just for gas and gas throughout the entire system and pipeline capacity. So planning, I can't stress it enough. It is doing the good and the boring. But it is the good and the boring that keeps the lights on and the gas flowing. We've also, through that planning process, I'm going to bore you with some numbers, but we've been able, I believe, to do some exceptional things in terms of building out generation. So we've put a premium on high capacity resources within our system. The higher the capacity value, such as nuclear at DOE estimates being a 93% capacity value, we've been able to do that so that we can assure that we don't have just resource adequacy, but resource sufficiency. And we've been able to do that and still incorporate renewables within our mix. So since the 2019 IRP, we've approved 17 gigawatts of capacity additions through 2031, with another 14 gigs of capacity resources coming on 2025 through 2031, including new natural gas generation. Net capacity resources in Georgia increased 3.2 gigawatts since 2020, when we completed Plant Vogtle nuclear units 3 and 4, adding 2 gigs of energy under our commission-approved portfolio, which, by the way, is a diversified portfolio. If there's a second thing that I've been able to work with state commissioners across the country on, is putting a premium on diversity of generation. We can squeeze everything that we can out of our transmission system and out of T&D. And there's certainly some opportunities for some squeezing. But at the end of the day, we have to generate the electron and move the electron. And to be able to do that, the best way to do that and hedge against price inflections is, of course, through diversification of generation. We have retired some coal. But in the last 5 years, we've retired 2.7 gigawatts of coal capacity at Plant Wansley, which we converted to gas, Plant Hammond, which we converted to battery energy storage, and Plant McIntosh, which we converted to gas. But those coal units were deemed uneconomical due to age. What we did instead was we took and compensated for that 2.7 gigawatts of retired coal by extending the life of foundational coal capacity at 3 plants, Shearer, Gaston, and Bowen. Yes, Gaston's in Alabama. We own half of it with the fine people there. I will never commit to saying Roll Tide, though. What that gave us the opportunity to do is to increase coal capacity on units that were newer, that had advanced carbon technology placed into them, that we saw beneficial long-term use. So we've not retired any generation asset prematurely without making sure that through our planning processes, we had everything to be able to backfill that. So when you look at this in its totality, I want to give you some Georgia numbers that I think we're seeing kind of happen in other states, not just in states with our similar market structure, which we're proud of and I will defend to the hilt, but also within states that are in reorganized markets. So our current generation mix right now is 45% natural gas, 30% nuclear, 15% coal, and 10% a combination of hydro, solar, and batteries. And we're seeing more batteries that are coming before us in the coming months as well. So we're not just meeting the moment. We believe that we are tackling the moment. And that's important to us as we have a growing state with a growing economy. We want to be at the tip of the spear. We want to be energy dominant and energy abundant. And we know that we're not alone. There's many states that believe the same thing and have the actionable work behind state commissions, their legislatures, and their governors to do this as well.
Terrific. Thank you, Commissioner Pridemore, for that insight into Georgia. That's really impressive. Let me just ask the gentleman sitting next to you, Arnie. Your company has built generation all around the country. Do you have any recommendations for us about how we accelerate building more infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you. And, I actually agree with a lot of the points the Commissioner made. I think near term, the fastest generation you're going to get, and this is the way we've approached it, is a combination of uprates at power plants. When we looked at this in Texas, we looked across our fleet. We identified about 600 to 800 megawatts of uprates at various plants. It's 50, 60 megawatts at a time, but if you can do that over 10 units, pretty soon you've got a power plant. So we need interconnection rules that facilitate getting those uprates interconnected. And I think sometimes when we do interconnection, especially as we're trying to look to do it fast, the uprate part of this can get a little lost in the mix. We also are looking at conversions, and conversions are, again, a fast way to take a unit that would retire and keep it on the grid long term. It's also from a permitting perspective, that's already an industrial site. There's actually very little permitting to do. There is definitely some permitting work around the pipeline if you're converting a coal unit to a gas unit, but it's often, again, very quick. And then again, we also are doing some or at least considering some replacements. And I think that's the other element is, and I would say especially in PJM and MISO, the replacement process where you can take a unit that's going to retire and put another unit there, that process generally works pretty well. And again, you're taking an already industrial site, already has infrastructure, transmission infrastructure in place, and interconnection infrastructure, and using that again, that's fast. And again, the permitting is straightforward because you've got a site that was already an industrial power plant, and you're just putting a different industrial power plant there. So I think we've got to be conscious that those avenues are real opportunities, especially in the near term. And the last thing I'll note is we did some work with the Ohio Business Roundtable last year around just things that the state could do on the permitting side. Ohio has an Ohio Power Siting Board. One of the things that comes up in that process is just this tension between the desire for more local control over permitting, but then the desire for speed and certainty. And so the Ohio Business Roundtable put together a combination of just common sense, recommendations for Ohio that went to kind of the appropriate balance between allowing some level of local control, but also allowing the litigation process to have some kind of time frames on it, so that as decisions were being made, you had some level of certainty that this wasn't going to drag on in the courts for 6 to 10 years.
Terrific. Thanks, Arnie. Next question I want to ask, you're going to be shocked on this one. Large loads. We've all been focused on this the past few years. But, again, the way I see this is, yes, it's a challenge, but also it's a huge economic opportunity for the country on a number of different levels. And it's not just data centers. It's it's reshoring manufacturing and other end uses of electricity that consumers want. But meeting this moment again, it requires that we build lots of new generation while also keeping power reliable and affordable. And so that means we got to be thinking across the board on getting new generation connected. We need transmission to keep up with those loads. I wanted to ask you, Gil and Kojo, your companies are both seeing a lot of this growth. Wanted to hear some of your takeaways, how you're approaching these challenges and how you're getting things built.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you very much for having me here today. Northern Illinois is becoming one of the, I would say, top 5 destinations for large loads, primarily data centers, especially driven by AI. Give you a little bit of context. ComEd's all-time peak demand since it was created by Sam Insel in 1907 was 24 gigawatts. That was set in July of 2011. Since then, it's been rather flat. Currently, we have studied close to about 28 gigawatts of data center application, primarily data center application. And as you had said, Mr. Chairman, it's not just data center. We are, for example, in Illinois, building the largest industrial quantum computer in Southeast Chicago, in the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park, which was announced last month. We're also building a large battery manufacturer about 100 miles south of Chicago, and other manufacturing facilities, so not just data center. But in terms of large load, we've studied about 28 gigawatts, and now we're studying in our third cluster. We're doing this cluster study methodology. We're studying another 10 to 12 gigawatts. So we're almost close to 40 gigawatts in the pipeline. And these are applications with site control. They have paid us a deposit of at least $1 million per application and have completed very detailed technical applications so that we can study them. So if you look at our all-time peak of 24 versus studying almost 40 gigawatts of application, and we're now opening our fourth cluster and more are coming, clearly there is a need to meet that requirement. Now, not every application, I believe, will become a project, a real project. So in our case, we have actually filed a petition with our state commission to change first to formalize the cluster study process, to make sure that we expedite the way we study those applications. We're changing our deposit policy, and now we want it to be on a sliding scale depending on the size of the application. And we are, similar to what was done in Ohio, we are proposing a structure where we will require applicants to post security on a take-or-pay basis based on the projected revenues from those projects. We're doing that to make sure that we avoid any cost shifting to other customers or expose our customers to stranded investment risk should those projects do not materialize or the loads that they have applied to us are less than what was originally planned for. So those are the kind of things that we're doing. Hopefully we can move out the speculative applications and really narrow down to applications that are real, and so that we can plan for serving them. Now we're in a different type of state because we are a deregulated state and under the PJM market, and so currently there is really I would call it an accountability gap. There is no one in charge in making sure that there is adequate generation capacity, and we are already seeing that states are stepping in. So, for example, in Maryland and Pennsylvania, legislations have been proposed to address the build-out of generation. And it's something that it's very, very important because prices have gone up in our markets. For example, the market monitor said that the supply costs have gone up 60% year over year, and that is not going to be sustainable for our consumers. So the supply response in PJM has not really risen to the challenge. If I can also just mention a couple of things, it's not just resource adequacy that's an issue, but also transmission security. When power plants retire and big loads, gigawatt, 2 gigawatt loads get added to our grid, it changes the power flows of our transmission system. And voltage violations and thermal overloads occur when those things happen. So it's not only resource adequacy, but also transmission security. So we're trying our best to make sure that we know exactly what the real projects are, and we would like to encourage more reform in the capacity markets of PJM, but we believe that states will have to create new mechanisms, most likely through legislation, to allow other structures to be able to have generation get built in our state. And I believe that it has to be both supply side and demand side. I believe that we need to, at scale, deploy distributed energy resources. We're proud to say that we have one of the biggest energy efficiency programs in the United States, and that has kept our demand flat for the past decade or so. We have rapidly growing community solar and storage in northern Illinois. We have more than 200 installations right now, again, helping to moderate the increase in load growth, as well as rooftop solar. So we need to look at the demand side and then also address the supply side and the transmission portion to meet this new load, to make sure that we win this AI race. This is a matter of national security for us. But at the same time, in the short term, I really want to put the focus on our customers and make sure that they are not subjected to persistent high cost of energy. And we have to do everything that we can to make sure that that is addressed more in the near term and on an ongoing forward basis.
Thank you, Gil. And following along with your large load interconnection reforms closely, very interesting. Want to turn to Kojo for his take on this challenge.
Well, thank you, Efrat, the phrase meeting.
Thank you. For the phrase meeting the moment a couple of times already, and I will say we too are working hard to meet the moment. We are facing incredible load growth in our service territories. I would say particularly in the Carolinas, where CNBC has named us the top growing state, North Carolina that is, the last 3 out of 4 years. We're facing tremendous growth, and we're building reliable, affordable new generation to meet this growth. We've invested more than $100 billion in infrastructure over the last decade, and we plan to meet this growth by investing more. I think we've got another $87 billion planned over the next 5 years, and almost $200 billion over the next decade. A lot of it in new generation. We are tackling this need by operating plants, much like my friend from Vistra mentioned. Over 1 gigawatt of operates through 2031 planned. We operate the largest regulated nuclear fleet in the United States. We provide 10,819 megawatts of safe, reliable, and carbon-free energy from those 11 reactors at 6 sites. And we're pursuing subsequent license renewal for each one of those plants. We've gotten one approved already, the Oconee Nuclear Station. We're adding 300 megawatts of operates at 4 of those stations, and transitioning 3 stations to 24-month fuel cycles later this decade, all of which will improve efficiency and ensure that we have supply to meet this need. We also operate what we call the Bad Creek Hydro Facility. It's a pumped storage facility in South Carolina. And as of 2024, we've uprated each one of the 4 units there, 80 megawatts apiece, so a total of 320 we got from operates there. Total generation at that site is now 1,640 megawatts. New gas, we plan new gas. Just last week, the North Carolina Commission approved a certificate to build a new gas plant in Person County, North Carolina. And a total of 7 gigawatts of new gas planned per our recently filed IRP in North Carolina alone. We also believe it's a supply and demand solution. And so on the demand side, we've got grid edge customer programs that encourage customers with incentives to employ energy efficiency and demand side management programs. We also believe in an all of the above strategy. And so we're making sure that we have a balanced and diverse resource mix that provides operational flexibility, which will be increasingly important going forward as we add some of this kind of load. We also think that our vertically integrated utility model allows us to forecast and plan for the growth more efficiently. And so we think we have an advantage there. In North Carolina and South Carolina, we operate 2 utilities, and we're trying to combine, we've applied to combine the 2 utilities. That also will help us operate more efficiently and plan more efficiently to meet this load. So we definitely want to meet this moment. It seems like a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and we want to be part of the economic development in our states. Our company was formed for economic development, and we want to continue that tradition.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I have one last question, and then I'll turn to colleagues here. I want to ask about SIP standards. Recently, we approved a NOPR RM258 for those following along in response to the potential risk of a distributed attack on multiple low-risk facilities. And a number of you have mentioned, grid edge, distributed energy resources as part of the solution, which I agree with. But one thing I wanted to ask about was, how are you seeing that risk as you think through, using these technologies going forward? Do you see any need for similar sort of forward-looking work to secure DERs that are increasingly participating in these markets and being used on the energy system more and more? And I'll leave that open. I mean, Jim, you might have a thought. Gil, you might Kojo, you mentioned this, so you're signed up, and Carlos, whoever feels comfortable answering would be great. But just wanted to ask about that. Thanks.
I'll lead off. I think it's spot on in terms of the risk that needs to be managed. I think the real question that we're going to have to work through with our stakeholders is what's the right way to do this, right? Because the volume and number of low impact assets is extraordinary, right? We probably can't protect them the way we would kind of a large substation, right? The economics of that won't work with everything else we got to do. So there's going to have to be some threading of the needle to figure out what the right kind of level of protections and monitoring, which is probably a big part of the answer to protect those assets. But it's one of the things that I've been quite concerned about since the Moore County attacks and since the Solar Winds event from 2019, because it really goes to show that it's not so much attacking each individual asset that's important, but if you can figure out what the threat is between them that enables a coordinated attack. That really wasn't in the calculus when the SIP standards were developed, but it's certainly in the calculus now. And I think the need to get on this is very, very clear. From our perspective, we think of all the Internet of Things, so to speak, as the Internet of Threats, right? Because if they're not well protected, I'm talking about EV charging stations, distributed energy resources, smart meters. All of these provide a potential, attack vector for adversaries, which, as I said, they're very good at figuring out how to penetrate these, and to penetrate them at scale is something we've got to get on top of. So I'll leave it at that. I think there's a lot of work to be done to figure out what the right solution is, but the issue is very, very clear.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add, Mr. Chairman, is that we need to support, all of us collectively, the R&D work that's being done by our national labs in this space. They are a jewel in our nation. For example, where we are, Argonne National Lab, they do a lot of work in this space. The Electric Power Research Institute, IEEE, and the standard settings. I call it this distributed devices really increases the attack surface for the bad actors, and it's something that requires vigilance. A lot more investment is needed on R&D. Flexibility is going to be very important, and a risk-based approach on how to mitigate the risks when it comes to those type of devices.
Got it. Thank you. And I'm going to turn to my colleagues now so that they can have time to ask their questions. Thank you very much, panelists. Commissioner C.
Great. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate the conversation so far. I'd like to start with the affordability question, and kind of to give context there, I've really appreciated this conversation on the emphasis of how much in terms of just new builds we need and upgrading and transmission hardenization. This is all necessary, and I think the conversation so far has really underscored that. But it's also expensive, and some of that is inevitable, but we are reaching a point where bills are becoming incredibly difficult for people across the country. So I know a number of you highlighted a number of these concerns and how you're thinking about it, Tricia in planning, Gil and Kojo in terms of the way that you are looking at it for your customers. I know, Matt, you emphasized, the importance of, cloud-based modeling and analysis and how critical that is, but it also comes with a cost too. So given just kind of an all of the above, I'm making this an intentionally open-ended question. I'm interested in how you all are thinking about the affordability piece, which is becoming increasingly pressing in these conversations, and what are the takeaways that you have for us as we're thinking about that too. So not to put you on the spot, Commissioner Primer, but I'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner C. The three primary things that state commissioners think about: safety, reliability, affordability. Not necessarily in that order of importance, but at the end of the day, it is pretty much that order of importance. The issue that is beholden to us right now on affordability varies by region, varies by market, because the market mechanisms in some cases are creating artificial drivers and constrictions within interconnection, supply chain, and just their very nature as a market. So what I suggest to state commissioners is to deploy what we've done in Georgia. So we are using these large load customers using them to be able to put downward pressure on rates. So the data centers that are coming into Georgia, they're coming in, they're signing a minimum year deal with a minimum bill. It's a 15-year deal where they pay for all of generation, transmission, and distribution to be able to manage to their load. We estimate, based upon the 7.1 gigs of new capacity that was new energy that was decided upon in our 2024 IRP, that's going to put $2.64 downward pressure on residential rates. That's first. These companies, these organizations, they have a book value that is larger than most state revenue balance sheets. They're interested in doing this. They want to pay their fair share. They want to pay. And so I think that it's high time that states, and if that, through whatever mechanism they have to use, their commissions, their legislatures, et cetera, come up with the necessary path to be able to have them invest in the system that puts downward pressure on rates. The other thing that we've done in Georgia is we've heard the cries about affordability, and we've put a 3-year moratorium. We've put a 3-year rate freeze on Georgia Power rates through the commission. And, the financial markets may not love that, but I'll tell you what, the citizenry and the 11 million Georgians that rely upon our state, they love it because it is going to help us hedge against incremental cost increases. We're still able to build and do all the things that I said before, but we're able to do so utilizing these new partners that the state of Georgia has in these hyperscalers. So my advice would be talk to your largest customers and to get them actively involved in the affordability dialogue.
Practical advice. Appreciate that. I don't know who wants to take this one next. Oh, Matt.
I can go. Yeah, Matt Holtz. So I guess we've looked at it in a few different lights. So first, just the merchant transmission model of the merchant operator taking on the risk of development and finding off-takers for that capacity. Takes the baked-in burden off of ratepayers. So we don't have a ratepayer base to take on that cost. But also, looking at areas where there's stranded resources, where existing resources are there, low cost, that needs to have a path to load to the market. So we look to unlock those resources and take them to where it's needed. There's also opportunities for additional development as well, because the areas that we're focusing on have a comparative advantage that can go along with that. So high efficiency resources that are stranded based on the underlying AC transmission system. So that's one area. Another area, your reference to our idea on overall cloud monitoring, more of like a interregional based approach. Really, that was focused on trying to find where the opportunities are for first economic energy and capacity sharing across multiple regions. If you have that broader base view, you can manage the underlying transmission system more effectively to deliver that energy to ratepayers. But also, there's an emergency aspect to that too. So we have increasing frequency of large events like Winter Storm Uri and Elliott that have profound impacts to specific regions, that having a more interregional view of managing energy flows can help to relieve those emergencies as well, to avoid blackouts and putting people at risk. Thanks.
Thank you. Arnie?
Yeah, and I want to go back to something Gil said about the 40 gigawatt expectation. And I think when we talk about affordability, we've got to be really specific and detailed about what challenge we really think that we're going to address. And I don't relish the job that the utilities have as they're trying to understand the load that's coming to their systems. I think every single one of them is trying as hard as they possibly can to put things in place to get a realistic estimate. We are talking about the largest companies in the world, really big. Deposits might still be something that makes sense, even if you're not going to develop that site long term. So one of the things that we have done is we've tried to understand this affordability question and think through the policy implications of it, is do a top-down sort of national load forecast based on something like chip availability or CapEx spending by these large companies. And when you do that, you get a number like 60 gigawatts of new load in the United States by 2030. So put that scale against, I think, probably the best estimate ComEd can come up with, based on very rigorous, robust procedures, but still 40 gigawatts. Compare that one utility's 40 gigawatts against the nation getting 60 gigawatts by 2030. So you've got to size the problem right. And I think in this environment, as you're worried about affordability, one of the things you've got to manage is the fear of stranded costs, that we're going to overbuild the system based on a load forecast that's not going to materialize. And for us, one of the best ways to do that is try to make sure that there are arrangements so that those large loads can directly contract with someone like a Vistra that is going to insulate that cost very clearly. So, I think the states, in the regulated states, have mechanisms where they can try to keep the large load paying for the infrastructure that they need, and respect the work that they're doing. But I would say in the restructured states, the way to do that is try to make the relationship as direct as possible between the large load and the supplier that they're using. And doing that will avoid the overbuild that comes with the inherent overestimate of load. You're not going to have someone building to a load that's not going to materialize, because we're not going to build until we have some level of confidence that the customer we're building for is actually going to materialize. And we're going to structure a contract between the two of us so that we're sharing risk, so that risk is not borne by ratepayers or captive customers. So for us, the answer is really strong load forecasting, very realistic, reality checked by a top-down national forecast, and direct relationships to avoid stranded costs.
Thank you. Carlos, and I will say, no pressure, but I am an AEP customer, so I'm very interested in your answer on this.
Thank you, Lindsay. So in terms of affordability, I think one of the things we would advocate for is, and I think was mentioned previously, more planning, ideally long-term planning, and especially integrated planning if we can, right? So that we can, I'll say, co-optimize the transmission solutions, generation solutions, and potentially even load shaping, load behavioral type solutions to ultimately, I'll say, minimize the long-term costs that all ratepayers need to bear. I think it's been mentioned previously that we are seeing, just in general, a lot more costs coming, right? The build out that needs to occur to accommodate large loads, and also the resources that are required to both address retiring generation, but also meet the need from the large loads. It's all going to cost a lot of money. And so anything we can do in the planning space to prepare for what's coming and optimize as early as we can, it'll pay dividends down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Gil.
Thank you very much. Our customers are really frustrated with the recent increases. 60% year over year is not a sustainable bill increase for our customers. We have, as a company, Exelon, try to be as helpful as possible with a suite of bill assistance programs. We even provided shareholder-funded customer relief fund for our customers, $50 million this year, to help out as a one-time assistance to address this issue. I believe that, like I mentioned before, states will have to play a role in making sure that we continue to address this issue. In Illinois, the state legislature is currently considering an omnibus energy bill that will have components such as energy efficiency, energy storage, transmission build-out, as well as distributed energy resources and integrated resource planning. We will see whether that will pass in what we call our veto session this month, or if not, maybe in the spring session. Other states, as I've mentioned before, have already begun looking at other options, such as Maryland and Pennsylvania. I continue to say that we have to look at both demand side and supply side solutions, including demand flexibility for these large loads. There are different types of data centers. You have data centers that are cloud enterprise-based data centers. In terms of AI, you have the inference data centers that answer you instantly when you type something on one of the apps like ChatGPT, and learning, training data centers. Those are the big ones. So when you hear 1 gigawatt, 2 gigawatt, 2.5 gigawatt AI data centers, usually they are the training and learning data centers. And those type of data centers can flex more than inference data centers and the traditional cloud type data centers. So working with hyperscalers and data center developers on demand flexibility is important. Deploying at scale as much distributed energy resources and GETs and all of the technologies to increase the capacity utilization of the grid will in the long term help in affordability. But I go back to, in our case, deregulated state in the PJM market, there is just not enough entry of generation happening. And we believe that, for example, in certain of our utilities on the East Coast, other structures should be considered, whether they're bilateral contracts, self-supply, and regulated generation, because in the end, this affordability issue really needs a direct solution, and we need to provide cost relief to our customer, certainty on how to address that issue, and also control on when those entry and what type of generation, whether the mix, the tenor, the hedging, that are required to make sure that we moderate the prices that our customers are seeing today.
Appreciate that. Tricia, if you won't mind, we'll give you a brief last word on this one. I want to save a little bit of time to go back to you, Jim, to talk a little bit more about cybersecurity, but I'd love for you to get a chance to have the final word on this one.
To Gil's point, a grid-connected DER, backup power for a large load, provides another ability to put downward pressure on rates. Because you think about it from an affordability perspective, you're planning towards a summer and or winter reserve margin. In Georgia, we plan for both. And so because of that, if that backup power is grid connected, that's one more element that adds to those reserve margins so that you can keep overall generation costs low, but then the utility has access to that backup power. SB 6 in Texas is going to try to attempt to do some of this, but in a very different market structure. We've been doing this in Georgia, as have other vertically integrated states, for many years for manufacturing. This is another way to be able to transfer that same type of policy onto data centers and new commercial business.
Great, thank you. All right. Well, Jim, I'd like to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about, I know process can be really boring, but there's some really important process changes that I think you all are working through when it comes to ways we're looking at SIP standards and otherwise. And I know we have the task force that's looking at what you can do to make things move even faster. We've had some, improvements and changes already you've alluded to. And I guess where I'm coming from here is so much of this conversation in so many different contexts, we're wrestling with the pace of change and just the urgency. How quickly do we move? And I know that conversation that we have all the time at the Commission is how do we remain appropriately flexible when we have so many new challenges and needs coming at us. But in an area, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, getting this wrong with the pace of change can have incredibly detrimental consequences. So how are you thinking through just the speed of change? How are we able to meet that? Do you feel that you have the tools necessary? Again, this is another more open-ended question, but as we're talking about how quickly things are changing and how serious the consequences can be if we get things wrong, without the chance to spend, months and months and years on end deliberating, how are you approaching this, and how do you think we should be thinking through those issues?
Yeah, great question. And we're not alone in this. I think the whole sector and most of our economy was built under a different context than what we're facing today in terms of pace of change. In our case, we were set up to deal with the issues surrounding the 2003 blackout, which was basically, codified tree trimming and facility ratings and things that people already understood and agreed on, right? Now we're dealing with these issues that we're trying to figure out what the right requirements are, right? At the same time, we're still kind of understanding the problem. And of course, everybody wants to get that right. But but it's a real challenge. So I'll talk a little bit about our standard setting task force, because it's really been a success story here, and there are a couple folks in the audience that are part of that task force that can tell you more details than I can. But we took a run at this 3 or 4 years ago, and we trimmed around the edges on it. But I think this time we charged the team and says, look, open heart surgery, right? Open the patient up, clean sheet approach. And the only thing we said we really want you to protect is the stakeholder engagement, because that SME engagement in figuring out what the right requirements are is really, really critical. We can't provide that at our scale. And some process to validate that industry agrees with the requirements. Because that's the special sauce of the NERC standards, right? Because then they don't get litigated and tied up in the courts forever. So the team has kind of broken the process down into 3 stages. There's when do we decide that a standard's necessary? All right, what does the standard have to do? And then does the draft meet that? And so 3 major things. One is we're going to get out of the process of developing standards through a process that looks to me like lawyers throwing red lines back and forth at each other, because we all know that's a great way not to get something done. So what we've done is we've kind of broken it into 3 stages. The first is the standard definition, and what we really want to do there is focus in on developing the moral equivalent of a term sheet, right? What's the problem we're trying to solve, and what are the 5, 6, 7, 8 things that need to be put in place to solve that, and get all the people to agree to that. The second phase is drafting the standard, and that's basically a process of saying, turn this into legal language, right, that honors what the term sheet's required to do. And do you do that through a draft and comment process so that all the issues get resolved in the drafting phase here. We also think there's a great opportunity to use a very controlled application of AI to develop the first draft, use SMEs more as a comment and refine as opposed to giving 10 engineers a pen and saying draft this. That's also a good way to get a confusing standard. But to solve it through the drafting phase, and then use the third phase, affirmation, to really be a thumb up or down, right? Did we get it right or not? We've charged the team to kind of cutting out about 50% of the time associated from kind of risk identification to a standard that we can file with you all for validation. And the process there, we actually have a white paper that's going to be published this afternoon that'll lay out the proposals on this, still subject to some refinement. The second point I would make is that the use of abeyance periods, I think, will be a very powerful tool for us. We've used that in a couple of the standards that we've submitted to the commission. I don't know if you've acted on, maybe one of them you have. But one of the issues we run into is that some of these are just hard to comply with. Whether you miss some data points in a calculation or something like that because it's not available. So this gives us a chance to get, I think, a tremendous amount of risk off the table very, very quickly, figure out if there are issues with the draft, right, in which case we can reopen the process to get to perfection later. The SIP 14 standard is a great example of this, right? Everybody thought it was a great standard when it was put in place, but then we discovered that the whole issue around dynamic stability was confusing. And we picked that up through the compliance monitoring process. We're now going back trying to fix that. So I think if we can kind of lower the tension around getting the requirements perfect first time out, the abeyance period will help that, and then be more clearer about what are we trying to solve, and not using throwing red lines back and forth as the way to do that. We think will speed the process up. It'll still be challenged relative to the pace of risk development. Much better positioned with where we are, and I think we can get a lot of risk off the table very quickly.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. That's really encouraging to hear, and commend you and the task force and others work on these issues.
This task force has been terrific, and I can't say that loudly enough. They have really leaned into this problem in a very constructive way.
Great. All right.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Chang?
Thank you. I have 2 sets of questions, but maybe I'll start by building upon the theme that we talked about, planning and building generation and transmission in an affordable way. And I've heard from various, starting with Tricia saying planning is essential, it's important, And, Kojo talked about that as well. And I'm also hearing this tension between sort of, in the vertically integrated or regulated states, we have the potential to plan and to build in a, I'll call it organized manner, but in a deregulated state that's subject to various different things that Gil and Arnie, you started to talk about. I want to just give you another chance to think, just help me understand, because what I'm hearing is, the merchant generation might not be building enough to meet the demand growth. So perhaps the states need to step in, and we're seeing states doing so. I'm also hearing from Arnie that you're saying, well, we like to be able to spread the risk and having these bilateral agreements or maybe a partner to sort of be an off-taker. I see both sides of the story and I understand the dynamics, but I think that still leaves a gap, assuming, states will do whatever states will do. I mean, can you just share a little bit more of the color of what's going on, and what do you see as sort of, maybe I'll pose it this way, what do you need from the marketplace for this evolution to take place? Are you seeing the sort of like a combination of states coming in, but merchants still continue to, do bilateral agreements? Where is this going? So I'll start with that one.
Sure, I'm happy to, and it's a completely fair question, and I'm glad we're going to try to get it out on the table. So I'll start with, I don't really know where the statement "we don't see merchant generators building fast enough" comes from. We're all going to get into the same interconnection queue, right? So if whatever region we're talking about, it's the same interconnection queue that we're going to get into. If the states say, hey, utility, you go build generation, or if they say, no, we're going to stay with the merchant model, the interconnection queue is the interconnection queue, right? So that's not faster for anybody. So then the question is, well, who's done this for a while and has got the experience and has got the kind of the business partnerships to do it? I will just tell you, based on the number of conversations we're having like the kinds of conversations that again, they don't become public until they're a little bit more real. But there are conversations with people to say, put a power plant on the site of a retiring generator. There are conversations about building new greenfield. All of those conversations feel very real. And because we're talking about a difference between a national forecast of 60 gigawatts and any individual utility saying that they themselves are going to get 40 gigawatts. In that world, that some of those conversations are not going to go anywhere, right? But some of them are. So we are having very active conversations with a number of counterparties where we are either going to sell from existing resources and potentially operate those resources, some of them very substantially. We are going to replace a generator that's retiring. We are going to convert a generator that would otherwise retire, or we can build greenfield. We're having all of those conversations. And again, we've got the experience to do it. And to the extent that we're getting into an interconnection queue to execute on that, we're all getting into the same interconnection queue. So what do we need? What we really need is a level of policy certainty. I mean, we all need better interconnection queues. Let's stipulate to that. We all need better load forecasts so that we know what challenge we're talking about. But again, we're going to make business decisions based on individual conversations, so the load forecast doesn't really factor into that. But we do need a level of policy certainty on how this is going to move forward. When we talk about things like states getting into the procurement business, the counterparty we're talking to about getting into a 20-year contract with us has to ask themselves, well, do I do that, or do I wait for the state of Illinois to do something for me through a bunch of other people? And that the uncertainty that is injected into those conversations is really unhelpful. So as we think about how we're going to move forward, I think a level of policy certain about what the state of play is eminently important. And then the last thing I'll just say is, in the near term, because the reality is, even uprates take a little bit of time. In the near term, we are going to have to rely on additional load flexibility, as Commissioner Pridemore talked about. These are resources that can provide that additional load flexibility. Finding ways to encourage the incentives so that as the new large loads are coming on, they have an incentive to provide load flexibility. For us, again, we're a competitive generator, so we'd always start with a market-based incentive rather than a mandate. And I think, someone's already mentioned the different types of data centers. Some of them are more capable of providing that flexibility than others. The more we do this as an incentive-based process rather than a mandate process, the more likely we are to get the right resources at the lowest cost, providing the flexibility we need in the near term.
Great, thank you.
Here are the facts. The prices have gone up 60% year over year. Because there is a structural issue between supply and demand. In our case, yes, we have a big pipeline of large loads in our application queue. Currently, we are an power exporting state, Illinois. But even if a fraction of the pipeline that I talked about actually show up in actual demand, we will very quickly, maybe as early as 2030, will have resource adequacy and transmission security issues. And there is no merchant plant being proposed to be built in our state. So I'm not saying that it's the only solution, but it's an end. If the merchants will be willing to come in, maybe on a bilateral agreement as described before to meet the requirements, that's good. But we also need to have assurance that that we manage affordability, that we manage resource adequacy, we manage transmission security, and the states will have to have that tool to be able to serve our customers. Electricity is not a commodity. Electricity is a necessity. It matters to the public health and safety and the economic well-being of our customers. And we need to have assurance and backstops that if normal entry based on the current structures, and by the way, PJM have made some incremental improvements in the market, including the interconnection queue. But there has to be a mechanism that ensures our customers that they will have reasonable rates, fair and reasonable rates, and at the same time that there's reliability and resiliency to the electric and gas systems to make sure that that their security in general is protected.
Great, thank you. Matthew, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask my next question. No, you could. I'll let you answer both questions at the same time because I'm anticipating a little bit based on your pre-filed comments. I'm glad all of you, or both of you, have talked about the queue and transmission security issue. My next question, and very much related, and Kojo talked about this in the pre-filed statement, Carlos talked about this. I'm wondering what the barriers might be on transmission security or transmission adequacy. And I bring up this queue question because what's becoming more and more clear is that the queue process, yes, we can all do better in the studying process and how long it takes to do the study and the restudy. And we paid a lot of attention in the Order 2023 about commitments and security payments and things like that. But at the end of the day, most of the uncertainty for generator interconnection is actually the transmission upgrade process and the costs associated with it. I just want to open that up. Maybe Matthew, you can start and answering both the previous two questions, but particularly the transmission owners. I'd love to hear more about what barriers are you seeing? I know you have pre-filed statements about the interregional process that AEP's talked about, and you talked about strategic transmission projects, Kojo. So I'd like to hear more about what are you thinking about the transmission space? Maybe you can tie it back to the interconnection queue. Maybe you can just talk about the barriers that you're seeing and what else we should be doing collectively as an industry to advance those investments. Maybe Matthew can start with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Chang. I was just going to start off by saying, Invenergy works in both transmission and generation. Obviously, are known for our generation development arm. We're newer in the transmission world, but so we're in the same queues that Mr. Quinn had talked about with generation development. We build natural gas, renewable storage, across the board. Obviously, that's a challenge. But going back to comments I made earlier on the focus on the merchant transmission business. In my prep for today, I was looking at some of the NERC reports, and the one report had a figure in there, the 2025 State of Reliability Report. Close to the front of the report, there was a table on planning reserve margins across the nation, that broken down by the different regions. And you can see some regions are marginal, where they're required, what they're required to carry is roughly equivalent to what they have in the base, with challenges of getting new resources built and retiring generation. But kind of goes back to the value statement of merchant transmission, especially for large projects like the ones that we're undertaking with Invenergy. We're looking to tap into areas that have stranded resources that can't get to load, that could serve those areas that are marginal at this time. So we think that from a economic standpoint and value to customer, it's highest value is taking advantage of what exists today on the grid. First, it's kind of the focus there, but there's challenges on the merchant transmission side as well. And Invenergy has filed comments in the past and asked for technical conferences on updating the merchant transmission policy from the commission. There's obvious drivers from offtake customer perspective. We work with data centers. We're helping to solve for problems that we've discussed in this panel so far, of how do you deliver a large amount of energy and capacity to big loads. But there's wider spread benefits with large transmission projects like that, and that's one area that we think can be discussed. That for those wider spread benefits, how do you compensate for that service? That the offtake customers that are focused on one item may not be willing to help fund. So that that's one area, and then the other pieces with projects like say our Grain Belt Express project, working with the different regions where we're interconnecting. We're all running to solve for the load growth that we're experiencing, and at the same time with the technology that we're developing, that the regions aren't necessarily there yet. So working in parallel with those regional entities, RTOs, or system operators, of how do we get their policies updated that we can integrate a resource like what we're developing to take advantage of remote resources, energy sharing, things like that. So thanks.
A couple of points. First, I want to applaud the Commission's efforts in Order 2023 and the reforms related to cluster studies. Duke was an early adopter of that process, and using first served process since 2021. So we applaud that effort. But I will say there are a lot of problems created with the queue with speculative projects. And so policy that would drive out such speculative projects earlier would be helpful. There are times, too, when these projects stay in the queue, they have an agreement in hand, and then suspend during the late stages, leaving some cost on the table. Holding such projects accountable to pay their share of those costs, I think that would also be very helpful. Strategic transmission projects, what I meant in my comments, for example, the multi-value projects in MISO, would fit that bill. In the Carolinas, we had a region where we identified congestion in places that was holding up studies and holding up projects for a while. Working with stakeholders, we identified a group of projects we called the red zone projects, and we got commission approval to build and to spread the cost over the entire base. That was very helpful because then you're being more proactive in providing transmission for projects that may not have asked for it yet, but it's coming, right? And so it resolves congestion problems in certain parts of the region or the area where you're serving, and that's what I meant by strategic projects. I think policies that encourage such development and work with stakeholders to get there, I think would be very helpful as well.
Yeah, just a couple of things. First, I'd like to continue to encourage planning collaboration between state utilities and RTOs. I think that's very helpful, especially with the type of loads that are coming in. I can tell you firsthand that we at Illinois, both ComEd and Ameren Illinois, which is the other utility in our state, have been really planning and collaborating with PJM and MISO. And that's been a productive exercise for us. Permitting reform at both the federal and the state level, I mean, that is really needed to be able to accelerate the siting of needed transmission to be able to support the build out. And the use of new technology, GETs and others, that's going to be important as we design our transmission system going forward. And just to echo, continue the work that is being done when it comes to queue reform and interconnection reform. In our state, in Illinois, in our service territory, for example, we have 22 gigawatts of renewables. Only 3 gigawatts so far are under construction, and while there have been good work done at PJM, we continue to work with them to say, hey, we need the other 19 to get built as quickly as possible. So those are some of the ideas that we have when it comes to transmission planning.
Yeah, I'll add that, I think when it comes down to some of the challenges, perhaps with generation interconnection, perhaps in the past we looked at the integration of generation in a very piecemeal fashion, one at a time. I think what I'm hearing today, and I think everyone is hearing today, is that going forward, we're going to need processes and practices that make the grid much more flexible. Some of that may require some evolution in how we study the grid, maybe elevating the standard to enable a little bit more regional and interregional flexibility. That will only help basically accelerate, basically make some capacity available for generation resource integration. I think that a strong EHV transmission network that is built to facilitate all this will just pay dividends, both in terms of generation addition, but also load integration. And I will say as well that I think one, perhaps an analytical way in terms of how we could maybe build in a little bit more margin and flexibility to the grid is by, as I mentioned in my filed statement, perhaps look at our TPL standard and what it considers or what it allows in terms of considering load shedding as a solution option to address grid needs. I would advocate that probably should be reviewed, because if from our perspective, if you're considering load shedding as a planning stage solution to grid needs, it's almost like you're kind of limiting your future options to have flexibility in real time. And perhaps in doing so, we're also limiting ourselves in having flexibility in the planning realm to integrate more generation. So something to consider. And again, ultimately, I think we advocate for a more flexible grid that has a stronger transmission backbone to serve all needs for all stakeholders. Thank you.
That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Chang. I think that's it. I'm going to pass it to Cal to close this out.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, panel. Appreciate your time. We will now take what was supposed to be a 10-minute break, so we will end at, come back at 11:17. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Everyone, please be seated. So we'll be starting with the next panel right now, which is ensuring reliability with large loads. As in panel one, panelists will not be given in opening statements, but will briefly introduce themselves before we move directly into the commissioner-led questions and answers. And likewise, material not covered today in these discussions can be filed in docket number 8025-8 by way of the Commission's e-library system. We will first start with Mr. Mark Lobby from NERC.
Mark Lobby, Senior Vice President and Chief Engineer of NERC.
Jennifer Curran, Senior Vice President for Planning and Operations at MISO.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jason Connell, Vice President of Planning at PJM Interconnection.
Good morning. I'm Matthew Gardner. I'm the Vice President of Electric Transmission Planning and Operations at Dominion Energy, Virginia.
Good morning. Travis Wright. I'm the Vice President of Energy and Utilities for QTS Data Centers.
Hi, I'm Chris Matos. I'm a Strategic Negotiator with Google.
Thank you very much for your introductions. We'll now kick off the questions and answer sessions with the chairman and the commissioners. Mr. Chairman.
All right. Well, thank you, panelists. Really wonderful to have you here, and thank you for lending your time and expertise to the commission. I don't have an opening statement. I'll just hop right into questions because that's more interesting and more fun. As you may have been aware, I've been very interested in load forecasting. And we touched on this a little bit in the last panel, but getting accurate numbers, getting certainty on what we need to build, whether it's high or low, that's really important. And so I would love to just go around the panel to whoever wants to speak about it. How are you seeing the need for more uniformity and how we forecast load? Is there a role for NERC? Are there things that you need from the commission to improve? And for our RTO friends, I'd love to hear about how you're thinking about load forecasting in PJM and MISO. So I'm happy to start with anybody.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, I guess I can start since
Yeah.
you mentioned PJM and MISO. Happy to start. We sort of separate out load forecasting into two separate sort of components. The general economic load forecast increase that we've been doing for several years now, and then what we call the large load additions, right? Which are additions of discrete loads, in excess of we call 50 megawatts or greater. So over the past year or two, we've seen a market increase in loads, large load additions, largely driven by data center growth. We saw this for the first time in our 2024 load forecast last year, in which we got quite a significant amount of load growth. It was 30 additional gigawatts getting put in by 2030 that got incorporated into the 2025 load forecast. We realized we needed to put some bounds around how we were accepting large load additions from all of our EDCs. And we worked together with the EDCs and the transmission owners that are part of PJM to put together some guidelines for the submission of large load additions, including financial commitments and how far along those loads were in their interconnection process with the transmission owner or EDC. What is the capacity versus the demand that we're expected to see? And also, are there any duplication in terms of speculation that could be gleaned from the data that they're receiving in terms of their interconnection requests? We're seeing that process culminate at the end of this year that will be built into the 2026 load forecast going forward. But these guidelines have allowed us to at least get some bounds around verifying a lot of the data that we're receiving, in addition to using some third-party tools in order to estimate the veracity of what we're seeing, from a vendor perspective.
And Jason, just a quick follow-up before we move to Jennifer. You mentioned financial commitments. Are those commitments uniform across the EDCs and TOs?
That's a great question. They are not. So what we do is we use several different metrics. One is what we call I'll call it a study agreement that a large load may have with an EDC or a TO. Then there's a letter of authorization, which is sort of another progressive step that authorizes the TO to sort of go after long lead material procurement. And then finally, there's what I'm going to call electric services agreement, which is more of a commitment to moving forward with the load being served and making financial commitments on behalf of the load to the EDC or the TO. We ask all of the TOs and EDCs to submit the various agreements that they have as part of their process, and then how much load is included in each stage. And then we look across all of the footprint in order to try and, I'll call, right size each agreement in so that we can forecast the load out in those recent years and then in the midterm years as well.
Thanks for that. I appreciate you describing the process. You know, one thing that always resonated with me about our generator interconnection reforms are some of the mechanisms to ensure transparency and comparability across applicants. And you know, maybe I'm wrong. You know, I look forward. You know, I sent your boss a letter a couple weeks ago, and I look forward to the response. And you know, I'm the kind of person where if I'm wrong, I really want to know and want to work with industry, both the RTOs and the folks building all this to try and find the right answer here. But one thing that just kind of made sense to me intuitively is, you know, if we're trying to count, you know, we should count on the same basis, and we should be looking to use objective, transparent criteria to make those counts. And so I'd love to keep that dialogue going with PJM and with your TOs and with folks who are trying to build things in your region. Thank you very much. Jennifer?
So at MISO, we have a little different construct, so we have a little different approach and set of challenges. So if you think about the resource adequacy construct for MISO, that's a 1 year out. So from that perspective, the load forecast is fairly straightforward. Generally, our load serving entities have a good view of what that's going to be a year out, and we're able to count that. In the longer term planning horizon, our answer is really there isn't a lot of certainty about what that load forecast is going to be, and that's why scenario planning is so important when you're planning for that long-term infrastructure investment. So simply put, as we develop that range of scenarios, we use a combination of information we get from our members, and similarly, we're beginning to seek more information from our members about the types of load changes they see and what those attributes are. But we do also look to a more top-down forecast of various drivers for load overall, similar, I think, to what Arnie was talking about earlier, and try to really get our arms around the overall size of the problem, because, of course, the risk is you end up in one of two bad places. You don't count the loads that are coming, or you double count the loads that are coming. And so we think marrying the kind of input directly from our load serving entities as it becomes more available with that top-down forecast helps us get that range of scenarios that then we can really try to make as we plan those least regrets decisions to keep moving us forward.
Thank you. Matt, please.
Yes, I'd just like to resonate with some of the comments that Jason made on the importance and the distinction between capacity and demand. I would say that is still something that is a topic of conversation. And one of the things that we have encouraged PJM, and I believe they've taken that encouragement, is that as they're doing their large load adjustments in their load forecasting process, that they consume both capacity forecasts and demand forecasts for these large loads. The behavior of those curves, if they lie on top of one another, then that can indicate that maybe there's more speculation in the load and the demand forecast than if there's some difference between the two. Because as we know, the demand that actually shows up, the energy that actually shows up and spins a meter tends to lag the capacity additions that are placed on the system.
Thank you. I've got Mark, and then Travis, you're next.
Thank you, and thanks to the Commissioner and the Commission for inviting me to the Office of Electric Reliability. NERC has really been working hard on understanding how fast this demand is coming on our system. In fact, it's one of the number one priorities is resource adequacy. That came out of the first white paper we worked on with the Office of Electric Reliability. And since to that point, we sent out recently an alert to industry, an alert 2, which basically had a lot of guidance around what do you need to be thinking about when you're interconnecting the load, what are the kind of the data you should be collecting, what kind of studies should you be creating, what kind of interconnection standards you should be considering. But then also a lot of information being requested about the size and the pace, because the knock-on effects are also then the other part of the equation, which is the operational reliability challenges, which how quickly do we need to be moving towards standards and registration and standards to make sure we're in front of stability problems, voltage problems, frequency problems. And so that alert's going to help us do that. I think bringing industry together to share some of these best practices we've been hearing today, I think would be extremely helpful so other folks can soak those up as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And now I'd love to hear from Travis and then Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. QTS is a company that builds, owns, operates some of the largest data centers in the world for many of the largest tech companies in the world. So we end up with a pretty unique perspective on where the industry is going. And I get this question a lot from our utility partners. Is this load real? Is this really something that's going to show up? I'll start by saying 10 years ago, a large data center was 20 megawatts. And truthfully, we were the prettiest girl in the prom. Utilities loved it when we came to their markets. 6 years ago, cloud computing started coming along. That 20 megawatt data center turned into a 200 megawatt campus. It got a little dicey, but still manageable. 3 years ago, the AI arms race started, and today we're building 1 to 2 gigawatt campuses with a very near-term horizon of 3 gigawatt campuses. So it's a massive growth. We spend billions of dollars putting that infrastructure in the ground. Land, buildings, fiber, utilities to the site. We build these facilities so that tech companies can roll their racks in, plug them in, and go. And then we operate it for them. Our customers spend 3 times what we do, tens of billions of dollars on those GPUs that go into that building. And if all of those billions of dollars are sitting idle, it is a massive loss of money for those. So just from an economic standpoint, we know that load is absolutely going to be there. We are right now in that phase of building and ramping into those massive data centers, and that load is coming. It is on the horizon. The other thing to think about, we talked a little bit. I saw that there was a discussion about 60 gigawatts of processors by 2030 in the U.S. Those get traded out every 5 years, and so they get a little bit better in processing. I'm not sure how that load growth continues, but it is an interesting fact to keep in front of us.
Thank you very much. And Chris?
Thank you for the invitation today. As the ERCOT guy, it feels a little bit different being in this room as opposed to the PUC. I think as we go through this, one of the things we'd like to consider is the harmonization between financial commitments and the broader planning models. And you see this going on in the SB6 discussions right now in Texas. Loads are equally and adversely affected by congestion interconnection queues because it delays, to Travis's point, billions of dollars of investment and leaves chips stranded and underutilized. But we're trying to strike a balance, right, between how do we avoid stranded costs in the system and the appropriate amount of economic development. There is a lot of load out there, and a lot of load is real. But the 120 gigawatts of load in ERCOT cannot be possible. And so we need to figure out in the financial commitments how to align those commitments such that the real load is being planned for and properly developed, while we are also cleaning out some of the queue for speculative load. we've taken the position that financial commitments and minimum terms are at least one component of this, but it does need to be harmonized with the broader planning process, and some standardization of what that looks like in the planning process would be really helpful. So at least at this point, there are certain gates along the way in which a load may have some certainty on its interconnection or know where in the process that it stands. So if we're doing an initial screening, probably relatively low stakes, but by the time we're signing FEAs and stuff, the load should be committed.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate you raising harmonization and certainty. One thing I wanted to ask Chris, you and Travis, on this last panel, we heard a lot about the need for certainty, contracting, and certainty in permitting to get new generation online to meet these loads. And so I just wanted to ask, and I think I know what the answer is, but I just wanted to ask from the customer perspective, are you comfortable signing contracts for the power that you need? And what, if anything, can FERC or utilities do to help facilitate that?
So first of all, yes, we are comfortable signing long-term contracts. We refer to them as take or pay. It is a situation where we will go into new markets. And truthfully, we don't go in with land and say, hey, utility partner, how can we get power to it? We usually go to our utilities and say, where's the best place for us to go? We typically are looking for places where utilities have stranded assets that they need to monetize. And we try to figure out how to make that work from a data center perspective. But we fully recognize that there are massive investments required. We put upfront capital into network upgrades, into transmission resources, and we are very comfortable coming up with ways to make sure that the generation assets are paid for by the users who are using them. And if that load that we are contracting with them does not actually materialize, there is still a take or pay component of that. Mm-hmm. So yes, we are comfortable with that.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Travis full heart. In areas where there is some restructuring, right, you see us doing degrees of self-supply and entering into long-term contracts for power. In many ways, this can be a little bit easier because we can pre-plan our load. We have in Texas currently contracted for far more generation than we're using at the moment. It's not that it won't be used eventually; it will be. We're laying the groundwork on the longest lead time component of our overall business strategy, and then growing into that strategy, which I think the minimum commitment structures help in other jurisdictions, because if that ramp gets slowed down or there needs to be that pre-building time, there's at least not a capacity concern.
Thank you very much. Interesting. And that reminds me of another question I wanted to ask you all, which is, as the customer, you watch a lot of this industry sort of, turn, to try and meet, serving you, the end user. And so one thing I wanted to ask you all from your perspective in this process, as the customer, do you have suggestions either for FERC or for states or utilities, for accelerating how we get this new generation built to meet your needs? I hear you, Chris, you're signing these long-term contracts and you're planning for the generation being on a longer lead time. Any other things that this commission could do to assist making that faster?
Tough question. But I think, one of the things that we talk a lot about is how data centers are often built in a very resilient manner with UPS systems, backup generators in them that can and should be used as a network resource. And so as we think about, and there's a couple of things that I want to touch on here. One of them is that behind the meter generation should be something that y'all know about, y'all call on. We're able to use it in a thoughtful manner. Maybe it's not turn the entire 1,000 megawatts off at one time. Maybe it's stage it down. But it is a network resource that should be able to be used. The other thing to think about is that we will plan a data center for, I'm going to call it 1,000 megawatts. in a very typical scenario, we can't use all 1,000 megawatts at one single time. And every data center in a region is not going to use all 1,000 megawatts at a single time. Data centers are designed so that their compute equipment inside is ramping up and down and up and down. And usually in a cloud-based system, they're all different. They're all ramping up. And so it looks like a very level load. In an AI data center, they're a little chunkier. They're all kind of moving at the same time. But the reality is that average load isn't going to be above 80% of that 1,000 megawatts at any given time. Maybe once in a very extreme scenario, but then not all data centers are. So when we think about our reserve margin planning for data centers, we probably shouldn't be planning for reserve margin for data centers.
Interesting. And I appreciate your points on the backup generation and making that available. Do you see any barriers to commission policies from making that possible?
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly a barrier of communication as to when they need to be activated and when they don't. And then air permit regulations are certainly a barrier. We very specifically need to define what is an emergency and when can we legally run them. The third point is that there's a mismatch between federal, state, and local air permit regulations that typically is going to get in the way, and so we need to align those.
So we don't do air permits here,
Yeah,
but we're very aware of that. But I want to and tracking, and I appreciate you raising that. On the communication, tell me more about the communication barrier.
Yeah, so we've got advanced operations teams at data centers who know how to stage loads on and off. They need to be told when to do it and how to do it. And so getting that communication, very similar to some of the advanced demand response programs that we have, can work really very well. And so when I think about how those work, it's typically that throughout a week, we're getting a notice that says, hey, this week looks like it's going to be hot or it's going to be cold. There's going to be an event likely. And as that day moves forward, we get a notice in the morning that says, looks like we're probably going to need to shed load. And then 45 minutes before, they say, yes, you're on. And then they give us a notice. And so having that kind of communication that currently is done from a commercial basis being done from a regulatory basis, I think that could probably work pretty well.
Got it. Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question and then turn to my colleagues. But I wanted, because we have NERC here, I wanted to ask you, Mark. You mentioned this briefly. With the frequency and voltage sensitive loads in the data center space, NERC is seeing some challenges. And this is beyond resource adequacy, but it's on operational reliability. Can you tell us what NERC is working on with your large load task force and give us a lay of the land on where you're headed next?
Sure, happy to, and thank you for the question. The first white paper, has been posted, and that really mapped out the relative priorities of risks. And that really laid the basis for the second white paper, which has actually been posted more than one time. And that's really what are the gaps in our standards, and what do we need, and who's responsible for those gaps. And as a result of that conversation, that's going to really feed into a preliminary guideline that we'll be posting here soon. I expect by the end of the year. We'll probably update that guideline as we get more information from the alert that we put out recently, again with the help of the Office of Electric Reliability, and really use that as a way to kind of inform that guideline. And that guideline will, of course, then start the basis for any kind of standards. We believe that and that we can register large loads because the impact of reliable operation of the bulk power system. Obviously, we'll use judgment on that. It'll be risk-based, and then we'll work with those folks to write the standards we're talking about today. For example, communications during events, when you're going to come off, when you're going to come on. Things like how do you manage the inverter-based resources as well as the inverter-based loads? How are they going to work together? We are concerned a little bit about certainly the sensitivity of some of the loads that we've seen, and how do we make sure that they will ride through during certain types of events. so that that can be counted upon. And that's, of course, the conversation has to happen with the electric utility and the large load itself, but then we'd like to get some consistency about how that's done. And all that, of course, kind of feeds into your interconnection requirements and doing those stability studies and making sure you have a model. Engineers are all about models. We got to model this stuff. We got to, kick it around a little bit, see how it's going to operate during certain types of events. And what are the advanced control systems we need? We're taking a system now that's getting kind of less and less mass in it, and we're having to act much higher speed with power electronics, which is great, but we've never done this before. So make sure that we do that right. So we are seeing frequency sensitivities, we are seeing some voltage sensitivities, and I'd like to ask maybe Matt if you wanted to kind of walk through some of the things you've been working on there at Dominion in this area.
Yeah, Mark, thank you. I've been very pleased to see how the industry has come together on the NERC Large Load Task Force work together. It has certainly informed us and helped us improve our facility interconnection requirements, which really stand at the interface between the utility and the large loads. As a matter of fact, we actually just updated our facility interconnection requirements and parlayed a number of key learnings from the work of the Large Load Task Force so far. One example is the NERC Data Center Information Questionnaire that was a work product developed by the LLTF. That's been incorporated now into our facility interconnection requirements. We've added a couple of attachments to those requirements that now require ride-through for the types of events that we've seen on our system that have resulted in large load transfers. Those have been implemented in collaboration and in communication with our customers. And guess what? The large load transfers have either greatly diminished or gone away altogether just over the period of a year. Not only ride-through requirements, though, but Mark is right. Engineers love a model. Phaser domain models are really important in the planning space to understand how these large loads are going to interact with the grid. But one thing I would say is extremely important, and that is point of interconnection, high resolution monitoring, point on wave monitoring, power quality monitoring, and synchrophaser data at the point of interconnection. Not at the bus level where you start to get all sorts of aggregation of behavior, but at each one of these large loads. So for every load on our system that's over 50 megawatts now that connects to our grid, we call them power electronic interfaced large loads. Always good at creating another acronym, but for each one of those PEILLs over 50 megawatts, we now require that type of monitoring, so that as the future does evolve, we heard these chips, they cycle through. These systems are upgraded in a way that provides large load with a different characteristic than historical large loads, right? We've had large loads on the system forever. Paper mills, steel mills, chip fabs, you name it. We've had those, but this type of large load is different in terms of how it can behaved in somewhat of a synchronized fashion, and then on how the internals change over internally as well. If I could be afforded just one tie-in back to Travis's discussion on the leveraging of resources, energy resources behind the meter or co-located with these large loads, we also agree that there's some value for the bulk electric system there, and have developed a program. We call the program the CapFlex program at Dominion, but that is really focused on helping us understand how far away from the edge of that N-1 secure region we are, and what we can offer in that range that would be curtailable, whether it's curtailable leveraging behind the meter energy resources or curtailable leveraging the flexible nature of the load itself. But what I will say is it has taken a broad cross-section of collaboration across the industry. Certainly Mark and I talk regularly on this, but also the National Lab Infrastructure, EPRI, the North American Transmission Forum, EEI, and then direct collaboration and communication with our customers, what their intentions are, what their capabilities are. We've learned a lot, and we've moved quickly. We know there's more work to be done, though.
Thank you, Matt. And Chris, go ahead.
Yes, to push back a little bit, while we do agree there needs to be some improvements in load's ability to operate within the system because of the contingency planning that they pose, we also would say don't lose the forest for the trees kind of argument. This is about single largest contingency and what market-facing solutions actually make the grid as a whole more reliable. So you see this in some RTOs where they've started, in international RTOs, where they've started to pose new types of ancillary services that might focus on just the point of losing a single largest contingency load and how to make the system more reliable in that sense. And especially where there might be high concentrations of data centers, this might actually be the better solution than individual load requirements. Again, load itself is not monolithic. The way that the data centers themselves operate within the system is not monolithic. And so are we going to continue to revisit these standards each and every single time new types of load are developed for individual processes, or are there better ways to find more wholesale market solutions?
Thank you. Could I just finish up on that and say that, the alert went out, we're gathering information, and then we'll provide that report to FERC around February timeframe, and that'll of course inform next steps. And so I appreciate the chance to talk about it.
Terrific, thank you. And just one quick follow-up. I hear a number of innovative solutions. I hear that the customers would like to have programs to make most efficient use of the backup generation that they have. In one case, it sounds like at Dominion they've got this capacity flex program that might be unique to Dominion or perhaps not. The two RTOs, are you willing to work with your TOs and your customers to make sure that we're not leaving any stone unturned and that we're making sure we can make most use of flexibility and all the resources that we have on the table?
PJM currently has an open critical issue fast path process that we are looking at in order to address exactly what the gentleman here to my right are speaking about. So I think we're in the process of doing that and looking at how load can possibly be flexible or other solutions that we can look at in order to ensure resource adequacy, especially in the near term, as we're going to hit this supply crunch that was spoken about on the prior panel. So I think the answer to your question, Mr. Chairman, is yes.
Thanks.
I would also say yes, we are in the process of convening something similar in MISO to address the issues. One of the challenges from the RTO space is that these large loads are not the MISO customers. They are the customers of our customers. And so really finding ways to bring all those voices to the table to understand what those requirements and opportunities are. And I do think balancing this question of what are requirements versus what are market solutions that we should be bringing to the table to make this all work.
Terrific. All right. Commissioner C.
Well, again, thank you all for being here. Appreciate the time that's taken. I know we've recognized that a number of times, but really do want to sincerely thank you for the time and preparation, the comments you submitted, and sharing your experience with us. My first question, I want to pull on a thread that's come out a little bit in terms of thresholds and standardization or lack thereof when it comes to how we talk about large load. I'm a lawyer. I like defining our terms. This is an area where I think that we are learning more with different characteristics in terms of some of the reliability challenges we're seeing, and when it comes to planning, modeling, that there can be a danger in painting with too broad of a brush in terms of what large load is. And I know that this was a theme that came up in a number of the pre-filed comments. I know, Matt, you mentioned a little bit earlier, if I've got this right, the PEILL that uses the 50 megawatt threshold, but you also comment that there may be other characteristics that we need to look at. I know, Jennifer, you raised a similar comment to say, let's be careful to make sure that we're looking at the appropriate variables when we're thinking about types of large load. Mark, I think NERC is looking at materially impactful large load, if I've got that phrase right. So everyone is trying to kind of get at this question about what are the sort of factors we should be thinking about when it's not just large load generally, but how do we think about this process? I know a number of you mentioned that large load is not created equal. So I would just like to open it up to give a little bit more detail about why that matters, what are the characteristics, and what are the different consequences they can have for both a reliability challenge standpoint and in a modeling and planning piece. So I don't know who wants to start with that. I think everybody's kind of got a dog in this fight. Go ahead, Mark.
Now, I think you put your finger on a very important point here, which is what are the characteristics that we want to be able to manage here as we make the system reliable and continue to make it more reliable and enable more large loads to be on the system. And so one can start thinking about some of those characteristics. Size certainly is not the whole thing, as you point out. So how does it react? How does the load react to during system events is one question. And what are some of the challenges there? And can they be managed? And how can they be managed? And so things like, we talked a little bit about voltage sensitivities and frequency sensitivities. Can we manage those? Do we look at common mode? Chris was talking about these large campuses of large loads and how that they can all act at the same time, and I think we saw that with Matt's one or two Matt's outages, how they might then go out of common mode. So I think that we will need to work hard on defining what that large load set of characteristics are, and then start thinking about, okay, then what's the kind of the sizes we need to be concerned about, rather than just go at it with it's easy to go at a size. If you think about how NERC used to do it with generating plants, right? 75 megawatts for plant, 20 megawatts for units. And that just came because somebody put a chart together and they got to 80%, they put a line and said, okay, that's small stuff and that's big stuff. And then later on, of course, we went ahead and we said, well, now we worry about those things that may not impact reliability got swept in, and those that do impact reliability and are underneath the threshold. So we've worked with industry on a risk-based registration approach. But I think the next major step that beyond the definition that we submitted is to get down to really what are some of the fundamental characteristics that we need to manage here, and then decide then what size, if that really plays a role, is another one of the characteristics.
Appreciate that. Yeah. I don't know who wants to take that next. Jennifer.
I'll just say, so in general, I agree with Mark. The phrase that resonates with me is this risk-based approach to it, because all loads of different sizes don't behave the same. They don't have the same failures. Where they are on the grid matters. How strong is the grid itself, where these are sitting. And so I think the more that we can point this to risk and characteristics and come up with those rules, the better we'll be.
Great. Jason.
I agree with both Jennifer and Mark, and I want to sort of make a distinction a little bit too. When we talk about how we deal with the load forecast and the large load additions, we're looking at a threshold of 50 megawatts to require a discrete submission from the EDC or the TO. That doesn't prohibit them from submitting something that is less than if their particular EDC or TO is of a smaller size in which it would be impactful. Now, from the study perspective, when we process these through our supplemental process and transmission planning and actually study the interconnection piece, I agree that I think it is very unique to the specific set of circumstances in which the load is interconnecting. Which area, what is the system strength, how does the load impact the system? And it's very much similar to how we treat generators that are interconnecting the system, where there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to how we do dynamic stability. With the generators, it would be similar, but with how we study the loads.
Great. We can just keep going down the line.
Sure, and not to be too redundant in the comments. I agree with all of them. It really is truly important that the large loads, as they integrate into the grid, are able to interface with the grid as it behaves today. So the grid naturally and for years has had a number of inherent self-healing mechanisms associated with that. Fast protection schemes, reclosing schemes, and other controls that keep the lights on for everybody. And it's just really important that we understand that baseline behavior and then interface with that in such a way that that does not interfere with the operations of these large loads. I think we're getting very, very close to a good rhythm of conversation and the development of technical capabilities and, as I mentioned earlier, facility interconnection requirements to make that happen. I will say I think there is work left to be done in terms of the load-oriented stability studies that the industry does, especially as the large loads begin to vary. We've received lots of information on how AI loads, for instance, can vary, especially when they're in training, and understanding how those dynamics interface with the grid, how they react with the grid, and what we can then do from a stability standpoint to ensure that they're integrated in a way that's accretive to reliability is important as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Travis.
So I tend to agree that not all loads are created equal. It could be that a 25 megawatt arc furnace is more impactful than a 100 megawatt data center, and so we do need to think of them in different ways. Typically throughout the country, our utilities are in that 25 to 75 megawatt range for what they consider to be a large load. Today's data centers are well beyond that, so maybe there are some sort of smaller installations that might try to go for a 24 megawatt data center rather than a 25 just to stay under that threshold, but I think it's probably beyond the need to set that standard in most conditions. But what I do think is very important, the term that resonated with me was the material impact. And so if there is a load in a section of the grid where relative size and strength is not as high as another portion, then maybe a 25 megawatt load would be a large load in that location.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And Chris?
I think I'm going to once again agree in part and disagree in part. I do think there does need to be a risk-based assessment for at least each RTO and maybe subdivisions within that RTO based on the grid strength there. But beyond that, we do begin to create additional administrative burden that you really start to see play out when we go into smaller and smaller incremental loads on the system. And this is in part informed from conversations as a result of SB6 and the ongoing discussion on that implementation where we're trying to find the right number. And the question has become for ERCOT and utility providers, how much administrative work or burden is that below a certain level as well? And do we recreate the log jams that we're feeling today? So I do think a risk-based approach is necessary, and it should do the best that it can, but exact accuracy may not be as important, provided we also think about revisiting that over time. So maybe at some point or other, we do become comfortable with gigawatts, and they're small system on the load. I know it sounds massive today, but megawatts were a big deal 50 years ago.
No, I appreciate all of that, and I think, Chris, your comment is a good segue to where I wanted to go next. I'm really interested in this question about flexibility. We're in a time, so much of the conversation today, and that what we have more generally just talks about, we're learning so much about this in real time. Things are changing in real time. We're learning about reliability risks. We're learning about appropriate characteristics, and we don't have the luxuries of society of sitting back and doing full planning and study and deciding what would make sense and then build that out. We're doing that all now for very good reasons. We need to be moving with that speed. So we're always trying to figure out, how do we appropriately balance speed and caution, prudence? What does that look like? And I'm also interested in that idea as we're trying to take away some workable solutions and homework for us here. I'm always interested in thinking through the relative benefits and trade-offs of mandatory standards and more flexibility when it comes to voluntariness. So again, this is another intentionally broad question, but I think these are themes that we are all trying to wrestle with in real time about when getting things wrong can have real consequences. How should we, do you think, be thinking more holistically about these sort of risk assessments when we don't have full information, and we also don't want to be putting needless compliance costs or burdens that are hindering important growth? So I'm throwing this one out to whoever wants to start on this topic. Yeah, Travis.
So I'll speak a little bit from an infrastructure supplier standpoint. When we think about mandatory requirements for load flexibility, from our perspective, we have a customer that we have provided a service that's going to be online 100% of the time all the time. And if it fails, there are service level agreements that we have to pay for. There's big financial consequences for that. Every time we switch that data center from utility to backup generator, there is risk that that's going to happen. They're very well built, very well designed. Doesn't happen a lot, but there's a huge financial impact if it does. And so that one, just from a commercial standpoint, gets very tricky on a mandatory basis. Now we've got billions of dollars in contracts that we have to go back and figure out how to unwind, and what do we do about a scenario where we are mandated to shift when we didn't. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a utility emergency.
Thank you. Chris.
So I think at the end of the day, most loads interconnect into the system with sort of the expectation of 24/7 service, and that's kind of how we've also designed it. And so when we think of flexibility, we think of it as a bridge to getting to the next level. And the interesting thing about it to me is this is something that can be used in the future for any of the next great electrifications, expansions, is getting comfortable with ideas of, or degrees of flexibility, and then reverting back to sort of what the stable operations look like. I think the thing I would actually ask of utilities and others is, what does flexibility have to look like? Because in some cases, it seems to be really around the idea of firm load shed. And others, it's the use of backup generation, which is incredibly expensive. And in other cases, what if we could flexibly deploy a portion of battery storage behind the meter? Again, does that offer the same benefit as a grid-based battery meter solution that's in a similar area? I think we have to have a bit of a broader conversation about what it should look like. Most loads would just say what's measured at the POI, and then let us deal with it behind the meter. But that's not always an acceptable path, and especially if we are looking heavily into all of the systems underneath, right? Do we have to know everything about the battery, or can we figure out through the communication processes and other things on how to just manage it at the POI and move along?
Appreciate that. I'm curious about what the other side of the table thinks about this too, for our grid operators and our reliability organization as well.
Well, I think you put your finger on flexibility. It means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And what NERC would like to do in working with industry and the large load community is to say, well, what is the expectation of that operations? What is that going to look like? And things like ride through. To what level do we expect you to ride through? Those expectations got to be clear. Is that flexibility? I don't know. Support voltage. When you can. Do we want to have grid forming inverters, just straight up inverters? In some places, maybe that conversation has to be had. But when it comes to the solution space, I think that's a conversation with the utility and the large load. But what we want to work with the large loads and industry around is, what are the expected performance standards that need to be in place? And then they can figure out how they're going to get there. But flexibility is all about just demand response and all that. Less exciting, from a power system perspective. But obviously, we need to be able to shave the pikes, the ups and downs, the excitement of certain types of modes and frequency of modes on the system that could result in small signal problems. So maybe batteries might be one of the solutions in strengthening the system. So those kind of conversations have to happen with system studies and between the utility and the large load. What NERC can do is set that platform for saying, oh, this is the performance requirements. NERC, I say NERC, it's obviously industry writes the standards with NERC. This is what the expectations are across the interconnection. And we bring those to FERC for your consideration and to make sure they're fair and equitable. And so I think that'll kind of help us to address whatever these kind of flexibility challenges are. I do worry about the adequacy challenge. If we're going to be counting on gas turbines at a time when gas is freezing up, it's not going to help us a lot, because the backup is going to be using the same gas that the large utilities are using too. So another problem altogether on adequacy.
Yeah, so I do tend to, in my mind, differentiate the idea of flexibility from the idea of requirements. So at least flexibility, as it's approached us so far in this space, has really been about how do you maximize the economic value of whatever your asset is, in this case, the ability to do your data center processing or whatever it is, when mapped against what are your reliability requirements, both from an operational perspective and a resource adequacy perspective, and really trying to come up with, in our case, I think that'll look like tariff rules or products that provide the right incentives, but also have the right requirements in them to protect reliability. So I think about that from that perspective. When I think about the requirements for reliability more generally, really struck by what you said of not having the luxury of time. So I think as an industry, we do tend to think, because we are talking about reliability is serious, right? Keeping the lights on, it can be a matter of lives in the extreme cases. And so that makes us have a tendency to search for what is a right answer. But in doing that, that presupposes that where you are is safe. And where we are today, I would say, is not safe because we are in tight reserve margin situation. We are in a situation where we do have new types of resources coming on, and we are going to have to make our best steps to continue to increase reliability. And I think that's going to look a lot different than getting to the perfect solution. And I think that's true even if we knew everything we needed to know about how the system's going to operate. And of course, we don't. So I think developing more of this iterative mindset as an industry is going to be really important.
Thank you.
I agree with Mark and Jennifer in separating requirements from, flexibility in terms of resource adequacy. I would say we don't plan for flexibility at PJM. We plan to be able to serve the load as intended. And I would say my biggest concern is resource adequacy in the near term with the lack of supply coming online in order to meet that demand, even though we are planning the transmission in order to serve it. So that's just one other piece I'd like to add.
Back to your comment on the luxury of time, I have teenagers at home, and so I never buy custom fit tailored clothes for them because I know they're in the midst of disruptive growth. And I think it really is important that as we think about not only technology solutions, but also policy and regulatory solutions, that we try not to overfit the moment because we know we're in such growth. That said, I think it really is important that from a flexibility standpoint, we kind of take credit for how far we've come. Mark, how long has the Large Load Task Force even been running now? It's less than 2 years, and yet we've surfaced. Not only we've surfaced, but we've come to some measure of consensus on a number of characteristics that in the past had not really been written down all in one document. We're now looking at the gap analysis, and then eventually the risk mitigation will come from that. I think we need to remain nimble from the TO perspective, from the LDC perspective. We remain nimble by certainly engaging in industry activities such as the Large Load Task Force. But again, it also comes back to the communications with our customers as well, being as transparent as we can about their plans, their systems, their interests, and flexibility on their side of the equation as well. So I think, again, just to reiterate, very much supportive of reliability standard evolution in this space. Just want to make sure we don't overfit the moment.
Thank you. Appreciate all of your insight. We'll pass it off to Commissioner Chang.
Great, thank you. I also appreciate you being here. I have a couple of very much related questions, just really building on the same theme again. It feels like we're, maybe it's the same thing as don't have the luxury of time. It feels like we're sort of building the plane as we're already flying it. And this concerns me a bit. When, Mark, you were here several months ago, maybe a year ago, I asked you whether you're concerned about the data center's consumption pattern or profile and potential changes in their usage, whether it's an outage or switching away or diverting the usage, et cetera. And my takeaway at that point is yes, we're concerned, and we don't yet have adequate information to track and manage this potential devastating occurrence that we hope it never happens. But again, we're building the plane as we're flying it. So my question, first, I would love to go start with Mark and go down the road. If you thought 10 years from now we'll have some kind of a steady state situation where we manage this, only this part of the question, right? Because there are a lot of large load questions, just this part of the question. How would you, I'd love to have like a phone survey at this point. It's like, how would you rate like where we are today from 1 to 10? Like if 10 is like 10 years from now, we're in the steady state, we know how to manage it, we understand the profile, the system's adequate to support all of that. Where are we? I just want to get a sense. Are we like at 1 or are we at 5 or 7? It would be really interesting. And then related to that, what are the data or analytical tools that we need to build to get to 10 or to get to the sort of like the steady state and comfort zone? And so that's sort of my first question. I'll just throw it out there in the interest of time. And the second thing is I heard a bit of a conflicting message here, which is, Travis, you said the average load is no greater than 80%. And I'm thinking and then you said we don't need to build reserve margin to this load. And I'm thinking my average load on the system is probably 60, 65%. And we build reserve margin to make sure we can serve the load all the time. And you also, in fact, you also said our customers need that load to be served all the time. So I'm kind of hearing conflicting things. So that brings me to this flexible load. I know sounds like flexibility means different things to different people. I just mean, and I'm really happy to hear you talk about flexible load. I'm very interested in sort of, I hear it's very difficult to switch over because there are constraints on my backup generation. But I also hear like we want to contribute to the value of our backup generation or our flexibility of consumption to the system. Help me understand, how to interpret this sort of almost like, both sides of the coin kind of thing. And like what, again, back to my original question from all of this discussion is like, what do we need to get to the actionable steps? Like, do we need more information? Do we need to categorize different loads and their abilities? And I'd love to hear it from the ISO's perspective as well as the customer's perspective, and of course, the NERC perspective. So that's my question. So very open-ended. I'd love to hear it, maybe starting from Mark. You got to give me my survey numbers.
Well, we're not at 0 or 1. I'd say we're about 5. I think in 10 years we'll have addressed. I just worry about the journey.
Yeah.
And that journey is some of the things that we are learning about as far as load patterns are concerned, and how that needs to be communicated to the utility and to the system, the RC and TOP and all that, so they're ready for whatever load patterns are going to be coming up on their system. So I think that there's still a lot of work there to be done. I think we need to keep moving at a high speed here. I don't want to be in the same situation as we were with cold weather, and I don't want to be in the same situation as we were with photovoltaics. I want to be right in front of it. So there may be some folks saying we're moving too fast, but if we don't stay in front of it, then it's going to run over us. And so I think that the industry, I think, is really moving quick and wanting to move quick. I mean, the alert we put out, we put that together in less than a month, thanks to the FERC, turning it around so quickly as well, outside the usual time period, so that we get get that kind of guidance out to the industry. We're putting preliminary guidelines out. To Matt's point, everybody's leaning in and helping each other out, and the large loads are in the room. It's not like we're doing this by ourselves. So I do worry about the journey, but I think that I'm a glass half full kind of person. I think 5 to 10 years we'll be there. Tools, oh boy, maybe we should have a separate conversation. But I just think that some of the tools we have today need to be re-equipped to handle these kinds of challenges. I was talking to Commissioner C at the break. You have ever been to like the 101 in Taipei, or the large building, the Freedom Building in New York, and you get to the top, and there's this huge ball, and it's got shock absorbers around it, which kind of control the oscillations in that building. And of course, in 101, it's really important because they get so many earthquakes, right? So yet those buildings are able to stand no matter what the wind or the earth, and that's because of that control. We're taking that mass out over time. and we're having to try to control that building with less and less mass. We have to learn how to do that. So I think a lot of control theory and control algorithms are needed for that speed of action that we're going to need for a system that has asynchronous loads and asynchronous generation in the future.
Yeah, what I've been thinking a lot about is, and I was more maybe at like a 3 or a 4, but I was thinking about the question of, to some point, it may not matter how good we are at issue X, maybe load forecast around a specific load behavior or Y. It really matters what kind of shock absorbers do you have in the system. And I don't just mean the physical one. I mean, how good are we at, maybe ironically, using data to predict better what the totality of the impacts of all of the things that are coming at us are. How do we make sure that we have, both in our physical grid and in our market products with incentives, the right incentives to make sure that we are able to bear these uncertainties that are really going to be coming before us? Because the one thing I do believe is that even if we've gotten our hands around this issue in 10 years, there's going to be something else that's emerging. So the best thing we can do is get better at quickly dealing with the uncertainty and having as much built-in infrastructure as we can to really provide that balance of reliability and economic efficiency. And so I do think tools is a place we need to be thinking about. Data is a really important one. AI, it's going to help in modeling. We talked about load forecasting. I'm worried about my real-time operations load forecasting, probably more than I'm worried about my long-term load forecasting at this point. And then the other thing I think that as I think about shock absorbers, I do think about the infrastructure. So getting the transmission built to help provide those connections and provide that optionality within the system is something that's really important, and it takes a long time, so we've got to stay ahead on that.
Thank you.
I'll agree with Mark and give us about a 5. I mean, PJM has been a little bit ahead of the curve along with some other ISOs across the country in dealing with the data center growth, and with the help of our transmission owner partners like Matt talked about today, I think we're a lot further along in this journey than perhaps some other parts of the country. So I think that's a good thing. Now, with that said, I think that there's some issues that could be improved. Mark was talking about them. I think having better composite load models for how the load behaves would be extremely helpful in our analysis. I think we're still in the beginnings of that journey, if I understand correctly from my staff. But one of the things that Jennifer said that I want to sort of piggyback on as well is having this transmission build out in order to support this load. I mean, PJM can only order transmission as a solution for the challenges that are ahead. So we have greenlit $13 billion worth of transmission over the last 2 years in order to enable new generation to come online and to be able to serve the load growth. So that getting that built is a huge priority. In my opinion, and towards, sort of riding through this.
Thanks.
In terms of where we are, I'd say 5 or maybe just left of 5, but we actually stand to benefit from some of the work that has been done before that did address things like IBRs. Quite a bit of study automation has occurred and has been developed in the industry over the last decade because of drivers like the integration of IBRs. Of course, now many of these large loads are the power electronic interface large loads or data-centric large loads, and we are leveraging the tools and the automation from previous platforms. We have an analysis on demand system at Dominion. We call it Anode, and we're able to leverage that as we do our real-time load forecasting, because I agree with Jennifer. Transformer by transformer, circuit by circuit load forecasting is absolutely critical as we not only serve this load, but we also expand our system and construct our system to handle the load growth that's associated with that. Mark mentioned the evolution, the transformation in the physical dynamics of the grid. I couldn't agree more. I think those are some excellent examples. I think of conventional load and conventional generation like big rig trucks lumbering down the interstate. They have that speed and they have that mass. Converter-based load and inverter-based generation can be like Formula One cars. They're light and sticky, and there are benefits to having both types of those physical characteristics when we leverage them to their full. So I'd say we're probably somewhere at a 5. A key thing that we haven't mentioned so far today in the discussions is also partnerships with the OEMs that are supplying equipment to both sides of the equation, both our customers and also those of us within the utility space. I've seen quite a bit of innovation there, and when we see it, we lean in and partner with them as well. And they're also at the table in the discussions, with EPRI on DC Flex, and in some of the other industry forums that we've mentioned as well. So I think continued collaboration, communication, certainly with the customer side of the equation that I've mentioned earlier, but also the OEMs as well.
Commissioner Chang, I don't know if this is going to make you feel better or worse, but we feel like we're building the AI plane as we fly it as well. So I'd say we're at about a 4. Just the fact that we're here talking about this, learning from each other, makes me think that there's still a long ways to go, but there has been an awful lot of incredible work done. And so I think we're just about to that midpoint here. What do we need to get to a 10? Better, faster interconnection modeling, partnerships on curtailability, and a lot more infrastructure. Those are the 3 things that float up to the top of my mind. Now, you asked a couple of questions about some of the statements that I made. The 80% of load, and don't have reserve margin because of that. So a data center will operate at a very steady state. We might be at 80% of our capacity factor, but 95% of our load factor all year long. And so that is just a flat base that's not going to change summer to winter, day to night. It's really going to be a very, very flat load that you see there. And so for that, I feel like that 80% number is built into the 60% of what's actually in the grid. We want to be very grid supportive with our resources that we have behind the grid. We understand there's some challenge there, and so my perspective is if it's mandatory, it's going to be really painful to get there because there's going to be a lot of infighting about it. If it is incentivized and encouraged, then I think it probably flows along very easily in the beginning, and things we can probably flip to a mandatory situation after we get to a point where it's sort of a steady state. It's something that we're all used to. This is what we do now. Just we need to turn that battleship very slowly to be able to get there.
Okay, thank you.
I worry I may be the most pessimistic, but I'm at least going to join Jennifer at a 3, but maybe trending on the earlier side. I think we're having the conversation about issues, about how to develop processes to address some of the issues. And it's a good start. It's also the speed at which we have moved within a year and a half and a year is incredible, especially for this industry. But I worry we don't recognize the interconnectedness at a systemic level, and we kind of operate these things in isolation. And it's really challenging when you have to build the plane and fly it too. The question I kind of just wrote down to myself here was, how do financial commitments affect the load forecast, affect the magnitude of the challenge, affect the feasibility of the solutions, which go back to, how quickly we can interconnect, which then affects the load forecast. And so it's this really interesting environment where we have a sense, I think, of some of the issues, but we're not quite yet drawing the lines from one challenge to the next and how they implicate each other. And we can only do so much at one time. But I do think we need to do a little bit of recognition at a systemic level of how these things are going to play into each other. So both from a planning and an operations perspective.
Well, I look forward to continuing this conversation. I'm sure there will be plenty more in the next months. So back to you, Chairman.
All right. Really fascinating discussion. So we're right up to lunch. I think we're right on time, which is great. I give us a 10 on on keeping our schedule today. But thank you very much, panelists. This was really, I think all of us benefit from your diverse expertise, and it's really important for us to hear your perspective. So thank you for that. Thank you, Commission staff and Office of Electric Reliability staff and Lodi in the corner over there for all the work that it takes to do this conference. If you have a great idea later, or if you were in the audience and you wanted to add something to this conversation, we have this great thing called a docket, which you can file into using our eLibrary tool, or you can request a meeting with any of us or our staff, and we'd love to continue to engage on this. I want to do a quick flag that this afternoon in about an hour, we will have a staff-led, so the questions will be better. Well, at least speaking for myself, my colleagues ask great questions, but mine, a little rough around the edges. But the staff of the commission will be leading that conversation. I encourage you to join us if it's of interest. I think that's everything. Anybody else closing comments? No. Cal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just this webcast will end, and there'll be a new link on the website for the wildfire. So, before you exit, make sure you like and subscribe. But just there'll be another link for the wildfire. Thank you.